Testing echo, testing echo, echo.
6:04. We do have, I think we have more than enough for a quorum. So welcome, Town of Belgrade Planning Board for May 19. So our agenda tonight is to go over. May 12th, that's for next week, sorry. May 12th, our only agenda item is for commercial development review, ordinance amendments, addressing commercial solar facilities. So let's talk about this. Dan, thanks for coming tonight. Really appreciate your attention on this. One of the things we want to make sure that we did was to address the setback discussion that we had started and sort of noodled around last time. And so I think we had some ideas about some stuff and want to make sure we get feedback and kind of work towards something. That's really important. Also, thank you both to you, Sarah, and to you, George. You provided some, and Steve, who's not here, provided some information that was provided to us in our package. So let's get into it, shall we?
Peter, if I may, I would suggest that we discuss in tandem setbacks and visual screening, because the two work hand in hand.
Very much so.
Setbacks in themselves really don't offer any protection, all by themselves to abutting landowners, to the public, per se. It's the visual screening that provides, the protects and mitigates the impact, and whether or not people can see it from their back deck, or drivers going by, tourists driving by can see it heading down Route 27 or wherever. And so the two kind of have to work together.
They do. I'm with you on this. I just want to admit you, and I'm trying to get there. So maybe I have to do it for this guy.
I was gonna say your mouse isn't working.
It does, but on this laptop. So I think what I do is go like this with this one. There we go. So you are in. Yay.
I also want to mention with the setbacks and clear cutting and all this other stuff. This past week, I've heard complaints about Waterville, where they're putting city-owned solar panels, and they cut right up to the airport, up around the airport, and now it's a wind tunnel coming down through there. That's affecting the neighbors because it's coming from the airport down through the solar farm and through the, so I've heard complaints about that. That's, another argument about setbacks and screening and,
Yep. Yeah, so that would be in support of having some kind of
yes.
setback, as well as some sort of.
Because, what I'm not getting is how we can't clear cut for subdivisions, but we can clear cut for these solar panels and put 1,000 little roofs in there. I'm not over that yet. Whereas the regulations for subdivisions now make it so expensive. There's not even worth subdividing unless you have a lot of money and you're charging stupid money for your houses. So someone like me wouldn't even be able to subdivide again. That's why I fought so hard for the minors. So, I don't have that bleeding heart about costing more, taking up more land. I don't have that bleeding heart because I look what we did with the subdivision ordinance, and I'm keeping it consistent, as you guys want to say.
Yeah.
So, we got to protect the other landowners. All these clear cutting that's going to go on, the runoff and the clear cutting and the winds that are going to come off this one up here, if that ever goes through, it's going to be a significant change.
It would be. Definitely would be.
I agree with you, Craig, that it will be a significant change, and this, the size, the potential size of these facilities is what makes these stand out. But I don't remember us establishing any setbacks or vegetative screening requirements for subdivisions in the revised
No,
ordinance.
but there's no clear cut. And there's no, clear cutting's definitely in there. By allowing clear cutting to go on, you would allow clear cutting to go on for solar farms.
Well, I don't think we should assume that we're gonna allow that. Because if you recall in my memo, I raised it as an issue that we should discuss. It, not necessarily part of tonight's discussion, but how many acres are we gonna be willing to allow somebody to clear cut? I never thought in my wildest dreams that it would be economically feasible for somebody to cut 65 acres, clear cut, deforest 65 acres for a solar farm. I just didn't think it'd be cost effective, but apparently it is. And so I agree with you. I think we need to deal with that in this ordinance, but I think we need to deal with it head on. The setbacks and the vegetative screening don't deal with that issue head on or even indirectly. I think that's a separate discussion that we need to have. Are we going to limit how many acres are going to be clear cut for a solar farm on a?
Well, we kind of need to know that to know our setbacks, because if we're gonna allow, how many acres to be, how big of a, so how do I know what to fight for a setback if I don't know how much they can clear cut?
Well, the setback would apply to a field. I mean, I think, I don't mean to be cute, but it's almost irrelevant to how many trees they cut.
So are you thinking, Craig, like, you kind of want to know like how big that field is?
I
Or,
don't care about fields, they're already established.
okay, so how about not a field? How about like a forest, like the example up here?
Right.
Right, so is the idea you'd like to know like what that limit of, or that size of the thing would be?
Oh, okay, so what's in the inner part of that lot that's within the setbacks to potentially could be cleared?
Right. So that would regulate how big the buffer is, because if you're gonna allow 200 acres to be cut, well, that's quite a area.
Head on.
And
You have a good point, and I think you're gonna touch on something
Yeah.
here.
Well, this is the thing. If you're a property owner and you're lending your property to be rented by this solar farm developer, you want your property to probably be used at least 90%, isn't it? That will be that's where I need a.
I can't use my property for 90% of subdivisions. I can't use 90% of my property. It's in the subdivision ordinance. I can't do it.
So how much percentage of it use?
How
So
much
you
do
cannot
we
do
have
it
in
because
there?
of ordinances, or you cannot do it because?
Because of ordinances
Okay,
and wetlands and everything else. And we're even considering to let them, this one coming up is gonna be working into wetlands.
so we cannot do, we're not gonna be able to do.
Yeah.
We want to stay on.
I
track,
don't see
think.
where we're allowing any of that yet, or in the memo I've written, at least in terms of my proposal. I've proposed setbacks as large as 1,300, over 1,300 feet from deer yards. So I don't see the comparison with subdivisions at all. I think a better comparison is the fact that the Bureau of Forestry doesn't enforce the Forest Management Act, and so that we can have 115 acre clear cut on the West Road, and they do nothing about it. That's the better comparison.
I don't know if that's a complete clear cut. They left a lot of trees standing.
I think technically they didn't consider it. I don't know, George talked to the guy, but I was thinking that probably they technically didn't consider it a clear cut. But from the layman's point of view, that certainly looks like a clear cut.
Even from a forester's standpoint, that is a clear cut. Well, when you leave nothing but those little gray birch flying around, that's a clear cut.
Can
but
you-
what I was told by the Bureau of Forestry director at the time, who since retired, was that they didn't, they thought it was exempt because the guy told them he was gonna convert it to agriculture. Guess what?
He didn't.
It never happened.
Sorry, I got the wrong place. I was thinking down on the Dunn Road, sorry,
Oh, yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I,
You know the one?
Where's that one again?
On the West Road, between my house and, yeah,
It's all, goes all the way to Castle Island.
yeah, right, yeah. It was over
I was in
150.
the wrong spot.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. Anyway, be that as it may, I agree with you, Craig, that we need to deal with somehow limiting the amount of clear cutting or deforestation, whatever you want to call it. For a variety of reasons, not to mention it's all related to stormwater runoff and
Yeah.
soil erosion and all those other good things. But, and I understand your point now about how it relates to setbacks. But I still have a problem with a setback that would preclude somebody from developing 2/3 of their property.
That's right, that's where I was going on with.
And,
the sharp-
and I know you did some calculations on that, so why don't I turn it over to
Yeah.
you?
Would it be appropriate to?
Yeah, to show them now,
Yeah,
sure,
sure.
Okay, so I just want to say one more thing.
sure.
If I subdivide, I can only do 2/3 of my property.
So we can set it up to be 2/3 here too. I'll show you what I got.
You know, it's just under, I mean, I have to leave, what, 20%, 20, you know, so maybe a quarter of it. According, what do I have to, can you guys remember off the top of your heads what it is on the,
You mean for open space?
yeah,
15%.
Yeah.
15?
If it's over 10 acres in size.
That's, so that's the non,
Non-bendable,
that's the open space, but
Yeah.
then there's gonna be, you know, buffers in between and everything else.
Yeah, I know, but that's all gonna apply here too, just like with any other commercial development. You know, buffers from wetlands,
So-
buffers from deer yards, buffers from streams.
Yeah, so those other,
We haven't gotten to it yet.
right,
You're right about
but they
that.
should apply, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it would
no,
apply
that's-
here like it would in the case of a subdivision ordinance.
I mean, there's no other way to minimize the environmental impact.
Right. And I think in the spirit of
I know.
what you're talking about consistency, to try and to be very open-minded about trying to be as consistent and do it just like this, in this one, like it is in the other one.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
you know,
we're-
as I've said before, we're not being consistent with how we regulate other commercial activities in town. Solar farms will be regulated far more rigorously.
Mhm.
And even though we haven't gotten to some of these subjects yet, just the fact that we have prohibitions on where they can be, where they cannot be in town is far more rigorous than what other commercial development has to work under.
Mhm. So could we, let's see, when you are ready, you can share your screen?
let's do that.
Oh, we're
So-
going high tech.
We,
Woo-hoo! I had to do a handout. Luddite that I am.
I should have printed out, you just didn't have to. So if I click here, share screen. Doing something now.
do I have to allow you to share screen?
I think so. You have to mark there that I can share the screen somehow.
So I go share. Host disabled screen sharing. So I want to do that.
Push the green button. You know,
Yeah, I was just pushing that. Host disabled. Stand by. Richard, do we have to share it from that other computer?
I don't know. But let me see if I can.
You might have to make
Sharing on this one.
Sarah a co-host to share the screen. Thank you, Barbara. So that's a good point. She said that maybe we have to make her a co-host. To make her a co-host,
You touch my name and right click.
All right, you are now a co-host,
There we go.
thank you.
and I have it set to multiple participants can share simultaneously. So that should allow you to share your screen, I would think. So I think if you just click share screen, that not working for you, so
Let me see. Hmm. Okay, now we go. So multiple participants can share simultaneously, advanced sharing options.
We'll have to make you actually the host.
Let's try that again.
So when you press the green button, it's not doing anything.
So what's gonna want to share is this one here. Let's try that. Sure. Wow, I think.
There we go. Sarah started screen sharing. There you go.
Yeah, figure it out. So what I did, I created first, I moved it over this way. Let me zoom that first. So I created a chart. Go back here. That's too much data, actually. Let's put it over here. So I created a chart where I set the size of the property. It could be 1 acre, 5 acres, and so on in this column, right?
Yes.
And I assumed that that acreage was gonna be square. That's the most optimal scenario because, for instance, if you take 10 acres, and instead of making a square, you have 5 acres in a row, and then 5 acres in a row, then you only have the distance of 2 acres together square.
Right.
And that distance is short. So the most optimal usage of the land would be considered in square.
Yeah.
So squaring that per side, for instance, a 10-acre lot that will be completely square, the side of it will be 600 feet. And then what you have here in yellow are the buffer zones. I iterated this several times. This is 10 feet all the way to 250. 250 was the maximum we're asking for. So if you have a square parcel of 1 acre, all right, and I assign to it a 10-feet buffer all around, the area inside that is going to be usable is only 80%. So what I did, I calculated the whole area first of the acre, and then I trim out all the 10 around.
Gotcha.
And so I subtract the area, and the area that was left inside, I divided by the total. So out of the full acre, if we do a buffer of 10 feet, it will be only 80% usage. For 5 acres, same buffer is 90. So that's a sweet spot for me because I was aiming for 90% usage. All right, in this whole thing. I hear from Greg that we should knock it down to 75. So in this table, all the greenish is what is the sweet spot for a business owner or the owner of the land that is going to convert it into a solar farm. So between 15 and 50 acres of land, if we only have a 25 buffer zone, then they can use almost anything between 88 to 93. So as you keep increasing, obviously, in the acreage over here, in the property acreage over here in this column here, and you go all the way. I don't know. I wanted to relate to Steve on how big is the area that he plans to develop? How many acres?
I think it's 25, isn't it?
25. So for instance, if we go there, actually have that number perfect here. He actually will complain big time if we go to 250 because he only have 27% of his land in use. 25 acres in an optimum way that his land will be kind of square. If it's almost even rectangular, those 20 acres, then it's much less than that, going all around by 250.
And Sarah, first of all, thank you for putting this all together and
Sure.
explaining it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but these numbers are based on the fact that we're assuming there aren't other features on the land that we have to account.
That's correct. The whole
like-
land is just open for it.
Just a
Right.
property line.
Just a
Just the
property line.
inside of it, what is inside that buffer. I created a
Right.
rectangle, whatever, end up inside the buffer, after the buffer is what is usable, and that's the percentage that is there.
Right. So if there were features like a wetland, or if there were rivers. or
That will be
something,
less.
Or,
And they
or
were
a
just-
residence on the adjoining lawn.
Yeah.
Well, now, that's a tricky consideration, because this is the buffer from the property line inside.
Right.
All right, so we talk about this whole thing that we're gonna do 250 maybe from the closest dwelling, which in conception can put us into put our solar panel right in the property lines. This numbers move away from that. Everything is done
Yeah.
from the property line.
But this is still very helpful. to-
Yes,
Absolutely.
give you a good
To get some
picture in numbers,
perspective.
yeah.
Oh,
So, that said, I thought, oh my God, I take this to the board, I don't know what they're gonna say.
Thank you.
Well, it's also interesting that there seems to be a tipping point for different size lots.
That's right, so here's a pitch for me. I would say that depending the size that's been developed, then we should accrue the buffer. So if I don't know that anybody's gonna develop 1,000 square, I don't think in town we have anybody that owns 1,000 acres.
Well, look at
For
what they're
that.
doing they're proposing up here. There's multiple properties involved.
So how much acres is that all add up?
I can't remember, do you remember off
I
the top of your
don't.
head?
I don't, but I did just look up, the average commercial solar farm to be able to generate 5 megawatts, you need at least 30 to 40 acres.
Right.
So you're not gonna have anyone develop anything under that commercially, because it's not gonna make them any money.
Right, it's not
It
viable,
would be
right?
private, say JR Metal Frame wants to put in a solar farm.
We don't care.
And we don't care about that, because, at some point, we may have to do something with that too, so again, you still have neighbors, they're gonna have to, it's fencing or something around it.
Yeah.
But, I think you're looking at anything, say 30 acres or more.
But to your point, Craig, one of the, I guess you would call it visual impact statements that we provided as an example was for a facility that's proposed up in Benton and Unity, where they're putting together all kinds of parcels of land and crossing multiple roads, and that's 900 acres.
Yeah, I heard 1,000, yeah.
Yeah, well, look at farming, look at the size of that
So-
place.
That's 450 compared
So-
to what they're doing in Benton, which is like 1,000.
So,
So something of that size, if they want to use 90% of the land, even let's say, go down to 78% or 73%, something of the size of, they have plenty of, they can go to 250. See, if you go to 750 acres right here, all right, it's 83% when you have 250. That's very appropriate to do a 250 buffer. If you connect, let me highlight it out for you guys. If you connect that column with the 750, which is about the 800 acres that you guys are talking about, then it's 83% usage right here. And when we cross that 750 acres with a 250, that will be okay. But if it's lower than that, the usage change the buffer, the line of the buffer keep changing this way.
sir, I want to make sure I understand one of the assumptions that you described
Sure.
earlier. And that is, if you had a narrow, a so-called spaghetti lot,
Yeah,
the percentages would be higher.
if you have a spaghetti lot, then based on this table, possibly they will not be able to use it.
Right.
With exception that then you will go into consideration if it is a spaghetti lot of the distance, what is the thinnest distance? And then you will look in this table, then in a different line, you will look right here, because you're talking about in feet with that distance between those two sites being, let's say, 200 feet or whatever feet it is, then you pick up that distance, and then you move to the green, where's the green point for 90%. But we're hearing here now, it should be more like 80%, because that 75%, 2/3, 3/3 is what we use in subdivision.
Yeah.
So in the case of a spaghetti lot, then on the ends that are far apart, you can probably put it into 250. But in the ones that are closer and narrow, the buffer will be smaller. That would be my intuition into it.
Yeah. I don't know, Belgrade's development history going back to the 1800s is such that we have a lot of spaghetti lots. Both of my lots are spaghetti lots. Because it kind of depends on the agricultural history of a town. Like you go to the St. John Valley, everything's a spaghetti lot. Because that's the way they develop land up there for farms, have a farm, so the houses all the backland was for agriculture and forestry. But I think this is a really useful thing, and you could pick. We could decide, let's say, that 85% is the sweet spot. Allow them to develop 85% into a solar facility, and then trace down where 85% is,
Yes,
and do a prorated
buffer.
do a prorated setback
Yeah,
based on acreage.
yeah.
What Chelsea had, rather than a set number for all size, they did it 10 feet of setback for every 100,000 square feet of solar array facility. And I did some of the calculations using that, but I didn't do it, like you did it. I did it for a modest sized facility like what Steve Bucksbaum got approved. Where if it's 20 acres, and you use that 10,000, 10 feet per 100,000 square feet of solar area, solar array area, basically the setback takes up 26% of a 20-acre lot. So it's a quarter.
And if we do 250 feet for if his area is more square than
So how
rectangular.
far was the setback? Doing that, what you just did, so 20,
It
28.
would be 87 feet.
You
So
follow,
it's all right to have,
so for instance, in a piece of land that will be 10 acres. And we have 1 acre on top of each other, stuck on each other. So we have something like, this was the thing that I realized after I left here. So let's say every square there is an acre, okay?
mhm,
And they have 10 acres. And we said, oh, the setback, we're gonna set up in our ordinance setback is 250. They cannot build anything there. Because from
well, why
here,
would they want to build on 10 acres anyways?
well, I guess
The
uh,
cost would be prohibitive, so.
So use 100 acres,
100 acres. Well, 100 acres that we
and I
can,
can see what it is right there.
right there. So to the sweet spot will be 86 right here. So the setback to accomplish that, whoops. Technology, okay. So I have to do it with both fingers, drag it with both fingers. Right there. So for 100 acres right here, to do 86 will be right here, so the setback will be 75 to make that 86% usable. But if you want to make it more like 75% usable, then we keep moving this way. 73, about 73, 78, so it's anything between 125 and 150.
I think we ought
setback.
to have one setback,
You want to have one setback.
because what's the difference if you're looking at 70 acres or 20 acres?
70 acres. The difference between 70 and,
No, I said, what's the difference
okay,
From the perspective of,
of the landowner beside it? If you're looking at 20 acres or 70 acres. I mean,
well, but let's remember that,
the owner of the land would not be able to make the most use of their land in it.
in terms of, people looking at this, at a solar facility, I mean, we're, at least I'm of the opinion that we need a much more robust setback and visual screening requirement than, 50 feet or, I mean, last time we talked about 250 feet. Likewise, from a public road, public and private road, but particularly a public road, I've suggested 200 feet. That would all reduce those numbers by some percentage point.
So then you're
the,
saying that, what,
But, where are people gonna be to see it, I mean, they're not gonna stand out in the middle of the woods to look at the solar facility. Maybe a hunter will on occasion, but
or they could build a house, even though it's not there now.
well, that's true, and that's why I've suggested that one thing we take into account is where are the houses most likely to be built in an approved subdivision. And that we take that into account when establishing setbacks.
Talking about approved subdivisions versus.
Speculative ones in the
Boundary
future.
line, it's wooded on one side and wooded on the other. The idea of requiring the same setback from the undeveloped thing versus where there's houses.
That's what I'm,
What I was suggesting or thinking about was, okay, if you have a approved subdivision, it's gotten its town approval, if it needed DEP approval, it's gotten that. Houses are gonna be there, even if it's only over the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
We know what the land use is gonna be. So if you've got an approved subdivision to the east of the facility and a woodlot to the west, that may stay, to the west, it may stay a woodlot, it may become a subdivision at some point, but we know what the land use is gonna be on the other side.
Yeah.
And so we can take that into account with some assurance that we're dealing with it in a rational manner. If the other, on the other side decides to do a subdivision or build a house or whatever, they have the option to design it to minimize the impact. They shouldn't have a free pass.
You mean for another subdivision,
Yeah, for another subdivision 20 years from now or whatever.
right?
I mean, they can design it so that they deal with the issue on their side of the property line.
And just to get back to the example, I think that Craig was maybe talking about, which is the woodlot that's to the west, and I think in your example of an approved subdivision, if that were later to be a potential site for a solar facility, right? I think, was your question, Rich, that if sometime in the future proposed solar facility, that we have guards in place so that anything that's in the subdivision wouldn't be subject to viewing?
And it was more, the question was more the fact if you have existing development, you want to make sure you get a good buffer. So if you had an area that wasn't proposed for development, get beyond that, we need the same requirements for the buffer where it's now wooded and no one's proposed it.
so let me ask, what's the number sticking in all you guys' head as far as a buffer in a wooded lot? Just want to know what you guys are thinking.
You talking about sidelines of the
setback,
from
yeah,
property line.
yeah.
Well, Craig, I've thought a lot about what you said at the last meeting, and I've come to your way of thinking in terms of, I do think it's inappropriate to have the solar modules go right up to the property line or 10 feet, which is essentially the same thing, which is what the minimum lot size ordinance would require. But I'm not with you on 250 feet. I was thinking if it was undeveloped land, it would be 50 feet and with no screening. And if it was and this is primarily on the sides and the back, okay, but like I said before, I think it needs to be more rigorous around residential dwellings and on a public road and on a private road for that matter. With the exception of if that private road's on the lot that the solar farm is located. Likewise, if the house is located on the same lot as the solar farm. In other words, facilities owns the house or. But anyway, those minor details aside for a moment, a universal 50-foot. I mean, I didn't have the benefit of Sarah's work, okay? So I need to digest this a little bit, but I was thinking 50 feet universal around from property lines. And then adding in 50 feet of screening, but only if the abutting property is a approved subdivision. So that we know that it's going to be developed into residential land use. That was sort of after thinking about what you said, and Sarah had mentioned some things, and also looking at the various emails we've gotten from Steve Bucksbaum was sort of where I settled out. But I need to spend a little bit more time with this because
See, I also have a chart, the graph, so to speak. And in here, what it shows to you is that as the property size grows, which is in the bottom, let me see if I can get all this in. I can get all this. Let me get all this messages over here first. If I go like that, I take that out. And put it on here, and then I can get this out. So I put a little bit less more here. So that was that chart, that table. I put it in this graph, okay. And I'm trying to maybe if I navigate it like this. Let's see, like that there. And then come down a little bit. There, you can see the numbers in the bottom.
so is the x-axis acreage?
That in the bottom is acreage. See it? This here in the
Yeah.
bottom is acreage.
So
So then the op is the percentage usage. So if we cut a line at 85, all these lines represent the buffer, the amount of buffer that is given to the property. All right. So the biggest buffer is the inside, 250 right here is the inside. So to accomplish 85% usage of it, we have to go all the way to almost 860 acres to make that usable. But if we do 250 below that, the percentage of usage of any property below that 800 acres, about 800 acres, is going to be less and less and less and less. So this is what will be. I would have thought it will be here, but I also can copy that line and let's see where I throw it.
So Sarah, using that
So if
your
you-
graphic,
Yeah, if you come down here to 75, oops, up here, like Craig was suggesting. So going 75%, then to use 250 as a buffer, which is this green line, it takes us to about 300 acres. If it's bigger than that, we have better usage.
Recognizing for a moment that Craig said earlier that he would advocate for a uniform setback on the basis that a 20-acre solar farm might be as objectionable as a 100-acre one. But I'd just like to explore the idea a little bit more, if you don't mind, Craig, of a prorated setback based on the acreage. And so if we let's say rather than 85%, let's go with 75%. Okay, 3/4 of the property can be developed as a solar facility. If I understand you correctly, you could go at 75% where that blue line is.
Yeah,
And you could say, okay, facilities with 25 acres or less would have a 25 acres,
okay, right, this is-
would have,
the buffer is gonna be in the ground, 75 feet.
right. 25 to 50 would have whatever that is,
Mhm.
50 to 100. The next, the larger, and then anything over 100 have whatever, maybe it's
100 will be more like 150 feet setback.
So maybe we need to have more categories, because like we were talking about, I think, I just don't, I'm still mind boggled by the fact that it makes economic sense to clear that much land. But if you're gonna develop 900 acres, we would need to have something ramped up for, maybe then it's 250 feet, I don't know, but I find the prorated approach somewhat appealing because even though it's more complex. Because it takes into account basically how much land we're taking out of development and how much land we're taking away from the landowner.
Right. Right. And two, I want to make sure to mention, just something that I think that Craig said that was important. So like, with a subdivision, with 10 acres or more, you have to set aside 15%. So I really like not having something greater than 85% set aside for developable in this case, right? Because to be consistent, we want to, I think,
85% or less.
85% or less. And these numbers that we're talking about that Sarah did all this work with is assuming that it's entirely developable. And we know that there are times when it will be less,
Yeah,
right? There will be features that will demand other setbacks so that even if you had 100 acres or 200, you wouldn't be able to utilize all of that.
it would be the rare instance where it wouldn't be less.
Correct. So I just want to make sure to mention that because I think it's important to be consistent, right? Like you were talking about, wherever we can, and codify that. Dan.
Can I weigh in?
Sure.
Sure.
I listened to the video from last week's, because I missed the meeting, so I went back and listened to it all. And I came up with some notes. And as far as the difference in setbacks, depending on the size, I think you could do that if you determined how much of the solar farm must be obscured at any time during the year. So say you want a buffer that obscures 80% of the solar farm, no matter what season it is. So it depends on, you could have a 250-foot setback and not have to plant trees as dense or use as much evergreens or whatever. You could go down to as low as 100 or 75, but you may have to put in a denser buffer. Or like I was telling George, even doing what the state does in turnpikes, like down in South Portland, they put in fencing for noise buffers and to block the turnpikes. If you put up a solid wall and you stagger your walls so that critters can still come through, so you just, as long as you do that, you're actually going to create all of your visual, everything would be gone, and then just have a minor landscape buffer in front of that, so that it makes it look a little better. You could reduce your setback by doing it that.
Sure. That's a good point, and I think kind of what you're touching on sort of is similar to what was presented by the landscape architect. Remember, he said you could be creative with how you do your visual screenings, right? Depending upon where, what the position of that solar farm is on that piece of land. Because you could have a roadway and a solar facility set far way back. You don't have to have vegetative screening right up against the road necessarily. You could do something that's further back, or the other way around. Maybe you would want to have it closer. There are ways to accomplish it, I think.
Well, that point was driven home for me a week and a half ago. Becky and I went out to Belfast for dinner, and on the way back, rather than driving Route 3, we drove through Knox, and there's a solar farm there off the state highway that I had to kind of stop and look at because it didn't have a single stick of vegetative buffer planted, but you could just barely see the very tops because of the topography,
Oh, right.
because it was on a downslope. And you couldn't, you were looking over the tops of the modules. So there's, you know, I that kind of brought home what Mr. DeWong was describing, where there may be land features that accomplish the same thing. But Dan, can you just repeat your thoughts on that again? Because I'm not sure I follow.
Well, if you went up here, say with this wooded area behind us, and you have some cemetery behind it, if you went out there with a camera, a digital camera, and took a picture of that, there are programs out there, you can run that through a computer. It'll take all the vegetation and tell you if it can see anything behind it. It should be able to tell you what percentage of that is covered.
Yeah.
And if the obviously, the farther the setback, the less dense that buffer has to be. Whereas if you only wanted like a 75-foot buffer, you may have to plant all of the cedars, like the tall cedars up at the where 8 and 11 splits, so that at all times of the year, they're green, they're always going to be dense enough so that you don't see what's behind there. Or if you get into an area where it's a marshy area, you can't grow anything, you still have to have at least a minimum setback. You may have to put up a fence.
Yeah.
Or like you were talking about, you know, an earthen berm. I would make sure that the earthen berm or whatever's planted exceeds the height of the panels from the view by, say, 3 feet or whatever. You know, and just go from that. I would have a minimum, I probably at least 50 to 75 foot back from the property lines, and probably I wouldn't hurt my feelings at 100 foot, have a 100-foot setback for any hard assets other than utility poles and transmission lines. So the equipment has to be at least 100 feet back, so you get no noise or anything else. But the view, as long as the view is blocked, at least say 80% of the view, I think you can reduce it by being creative, by requiring other materials.
George was talking about 50 foot and maybe a little, might need a little larger depending on what the situation is. I was thinking 100 foot south. In terms of something, I think, Peter, you might have earlier asked, what do we think about setbacks or in terms of number? I think that's when George spoke up. Just to let you know that my thinking was 100.
And I was thinking to drop down to 150, so.
I would prefer to see more than less,
And,
just to let you know.
because I know the 250 is pretty stout.
You know, I've been hearing from a lot of people, and I was telling George, I've actually had a bunch of them have told me that when this is all said and done, if they don't think it's going to be strict enough for the buffer, they're talking about putting a petition along with it. And they're talking pretty strict buffers, which I think are way overboard. But I'd like to get this right and not have to do it.
Yeah.
So right now, from the people I've talked to in this town, if you did a poll, if we just did a survey, I think you're gonna find more than 50% of this town would ban solar farms if they legally could.
Hmm.
So just bear that in mind.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Right.
And like I said, and a lot of it's because I hear the same thing about, the water, we've got to have all these regulations on the water because this is a tourist town, we depend on the water, we depend on the tourists.
Mhm.
And I've heard that one only from people going, the tourists don't want to come into this town and see for solar farms.
So can we go back?
Yeah,
We still need this view, or we can go back to
Not at
to
the
share your,
yeah, I think we're okay. So you want to not share the
That's
the
right.
thing anymore? Okay, so.
I feel exposed.
Okay. Let's conceal you then, so we'll do that. So do I go to share and then say stop?
I'm not sure how that goes.
Host disabled screen sharing? Maybe go to options, standby.
I guess I gotta be undo as a host.
I can take you
Remove that,
being a co.
because I think I still have control the whole thing, and I don't know how
I
to
think
give it to
so.
you.
You don't know what to do with all the control, do you, Sarah?
All the power. It's the power.
It's not my thing.
You do
While they're
that,
doing that too,
and then I can do.
one thing I would like to see too is any transmission lines or any road access roads going into these, to make sure they go in as a non-direct line. So again, that also
Stop
blocks the line
sharing.
of sight.
There we go.
So you're not looking right down the power line into the solar farm. So if you
Gotcha.
go in, you turn and then you go that way. If you're standing out here and you're even looking at an angle, you're gonna get all the sides of that corridor before you actually see that. So
That's a good thought.
It is.
Well-designed subdivisions are often done that way with their access roads.
It's a good thought. Thank you.
Can you go quickly about that again? I missed it.
to make the access roads and the power line corridors non-direct. So you can't just come off the road and go straight into to the solar farm.
Okay,
You'd come in, you'd make a 90-degree turn or whatever, and go that way, 40 feet or whatever.
Gotcha.
And then turn and go that way.
Yeah.
So that way you're not looking right down the corridors.
the only other thing I had to add to this whole thing as I was thinking about it is that the buffers will be different depending on the inclination of the land.
Right.
So if you have a flat land, the buffer will be probably more susceptible to the small. But if we have an inclined land where the runoff is really gonna make a push on the top, then the buffer have to be more thick.
What regulates that?
What was that?
What regulates that?
Well, that we should put that in the,
Because what they're proposing up here, all those people down on the lake are very concerned with the runoff.
I don't doubt it, yeah.
The answer from the engineer at the meeting was, oh, we'll just put in berms and direct it into a ditch, was their answer. So,
And that's I mean, I was not quite,
and they're cutting down all these trees, and what are they, 40 gallons a day of trees? Is that what they came up with?
That's the number I think I heard.
Yeah.
so I came to the meeting last night, just afternoon with the lakes meeting. And it really came to picture the fact of the runoff, because you have to look after all those and policy about that into the lake and how it affects the lakes. So this is gonna be a lot of impervious surface in an incline going into the lake. And
But
that can be
your
an
point's
issue.
well taken though, also in terms of visibility.
Hmm.
And I think the only way we can really deal with that, unless we come up with one heck of a complicated algorithm, is to rely on what we've already decided to require, and that is the visual impact assessment.
Hmm.
Because that will be site specific, and so if the slope is towards a bunch of development down here, a bunch of homes down here, that'll tell us
Mhm.
what, that they need, in addition to any setbacks, uniform, setbacks that we require here.
Yeah.
And really, when you establish uniform setbacks and visual screening, there's an underlying assumption the land's flat. Well, that's not gonna be the case oftentimes.
Right.
I mean, it is in Steve Buckbaum's site, but a lot of times it won't be, as we know. And so the only way you can take that into account is through that visual impact assessment, where it's the process you're describing, where you take, you know, not only photographs, but you look at the GIS LiDAR type stuff, and they're gonna have to come up with some kind of mitigation plan to deal with that. I don't know what it is in an extreme example. It might be what you're describing, a landscape berm.
Yeah, if you downgrade on a hill, you're gonna see less of it when you put in your normal screening. Than you will if you're actually upgraded above it.
That's what I was just gonna
Because if you're
say.
down looking up, the panels are always gonna be lower than what you're looking up at the trees. If you're up above it, you could actually look over the trees to see the far end of it.
Yeah, and you're gonna be affected more by it being downhill. And,
You'd be affected for the direct runoff and stuff.
Yeah,
yes, even though, because that's why we can't just rely on the visual assessment, because if I got a house here 20, 30 feet away, I have a bunch of trees, well, I'm not gonna be able to see uphill and see it, so the visual assessment's not gonna work. It's not gonna go into effect, because you can't see it. But all that runoff and everything's gonna be right down onto my property.
I was telling George too, and I've got my age trying to find the legislation that went through this year. It's one of the pieces that went through without any debate, they just put it under the hammer. But I remember when I was trying to scroll through it as they were running stuff through the hammer, they made it, the towns are more responsible for runoff that contaminates lakes and streams on private roads. So the town could ultimately be responsible for mitigating the runoff if we don't do it.
Oh,
So I'm trying to find that legislation so I can really give it to you guys. Because when they were talking about it, we all went, what? That's gonna cost the towns and cities serious money.
absolutely.
If this happens and somebody starts complaining about runoff under the streams, and it has to do with private roads, making the towns responsible for.
Private roads.
I mean, you know, we're kind of moving on our focus from one topic to another here, but, you know, we need to talk about stormwater runoff, phosphorus runoff, as well as offsite flooding. And, but remember, there are already provisions in the ordinance that and that's why you don't see any, I didn't propose anything additional that would require the stormwater to be at pre-development levels. So if it was all wooded, they have to demonstrate that they're gonna manage it by infiltration or whatever, filter buffers or whatever means, so that it's no more than
it was before.
what it was before in terms of the land use. If it was fields, then it's gonna be higher, but you know, that's the standard that we hold everybody else to, and that's the standard they should be held to, these developers should be held to as well. But I think we really need to focus tonight on the setbacks and this visual screening.
Yep.
We're gonna get this done on time.
Yep, we do.
So
So how-
Reedfield has 200 feet. Some of us, some want 100 feet in here. Um, You know, 150 feet. I mean, Reedfield's got a good point. I like the way presentation they gave. I like the way they, you know, I know they have a little different government, a little different zoning and stuff. But I like the whole idea of what they're doing. You know, do the 250 feet around a residence. 150 feet, 125 feet. Non-wooded.
What was the last one you said?
I mean, wooded areas, 120, you know, the non-developed areas.
You're talking just setback at the moment?
Yeah,
So depending on where the proper line is, what is on the other side, the buffer is gonna be different. is what I'm saying.
I didn't say anything about, it's talking setbacks.
Setbacks, okay, so what is the difference then between buffer and
I
setback?
like,
Well,
well, buffers
buffer-
why you plant it,
We planted, okay, so a setback,
yeah.
all right,
It's just how close the modules and
okay.
Mhm.
potentially the fencing can get.
Gotcha. So, depending on what is on the other side of the setback, the setback will be different, is what we're saying.
No, well, only from a resident, I like the 250 that George has done here,
Yeah,
from a residence, that's fine.
but once it's moved
And
away
then
from that,
other than that, through the backwoods and everything else, 150, 125 feet. Reedfield has 200.
So if we're talking just
Oh,
setbacks,
Mhm.
and it sounds like what you're trying to get at is a single number, right?
Yes.
That we could agree upon, perhaps. You're suggesting either like a 125, 150
Mhm.
kind of a thing, that would be
Yes.
acceptable
Yep,
from your perspective.
Craig, what was your thoughts on from a public road or private road?
the 250 like you.
Like, okay,
So, just so I can understand, I keep it straight in my head. So you're talking 250 feet from any residence or public or private road.
Yeah.
Setback. You're talking 100 foot, 150 foot from the property line with like 100 foot wooded buffer.
We haven't
We-
talked buffers, we're just talking setback.
With the likelihood, just so you know, that there would be some kind of a visual screen that we have yet to decide,
Right. Some kind of buffer either.
right? You know, we,
Mhm.
You know,
right.
so
And so,
none of the hard assets would be within 150 feet of the property.
Correct,
right, so.
that's what I'm suggesting, 150,
So if we-
125.
And that's kind of the notes that I preferred, that I had written down here too, so that sounds good. to me.
So, and we haven't decided on that yet. I think what we're just talking about is like
Right.
that's
That's what
kind
I
of a
suggested.
generic, sort of a thing. So what that does do would, based on Sarah's work, we wouldn't be seeing a graduated thing based on size, right?
The only thing it would eliminate is you wouldn't have to worry about the 250 foot on the undeveloped sides. It'd be just strictly that 150.
Correct.
sir, I'm not gonna ask you to pull it up on the screen again,
Sure.
but what would 150 foot buffer, a setback, excuse me, result in a 25 acre? My concern is, I don't want
It's
to inadvert,
50%,
pardon,
50%.
50%.
Usage.
I don't want to have an unintended consequence of creating incentive for people to develop only the largest of the industrial size solar farms in Belgrade. Because then it's a self-defeating requirement. I think what's better for Belgrade, a town like Belgrade, that's a lake community, a tourism community, is smaller, modest sized facilities. We can't ban them, that's illegal. We don't have the authority to do that. So I think we need to tailor these to get the outcome that we want. And I would much rather see a half a dozen 25 acres than one 900 acre.
How does that affect the long range plan that, because they're trying to keep industrial stuff to certain areas of this town? I mean, you could turn around and put these smaller solar farms basically anywhere. I'd rather see the bigger ones concentrated where we want to see the development, rather than having smaller ones scattered all over the place.
That's a great question, because from my perspective, when we were going through the comprehensive plan, I know I didn't have any idea about solar farms going on. And what I recall was, in my mind anyway, we're thinking about commercial development being along already established corridors,
Right, these
right?
areas.
In my mind, I'm thinking a business, some kind of a brick and mortar thing that has a parking lot, people park there and they go buy something or build something or make something. That's what I was thinking. This type of commercial activity that we're talking about is a different beast. So, how does that fit into what is now kind of an antiquated comprehensive plan? Relative to that idea, right? And the established corridors and stuff, because for a solar farm to be, like we're talking about, whether it's a moderate sized one or a large one, chances are it's not gonna be on the corridor, it's gonna be off those corridors and in some wooded area, like up here, right? Or something else that's available somewhere. And almost by default, you're gonna be not on the road.
I mean, Dan, just so you know, and maybe you picked up on this, by listening to the tape, the video from the prior meeting, but, actually it was 2 meetings ago that we decided this. We're proposing that there's certain parts of town where these facilities would be prohibited. The shoreline zone,
Which, yeah, I mean, that,
the village and critical resource conservation, this is all based on the comprehensive plan. And so that leaves the general development. We don't have much of that, it's basically lands that Tandem owns. Gagny. But we've also prohibited areas of 20% or greater slope and areas of elevations greater than 550 feet.
so, I mean, you're turnaround and limiting lands right now anyway.
Correct.
So by doing that, when you start with the argument, well, we don't want to tell somebody that only has 20 acres that they really can't put a solar farm on, but you are telling other places that if you have lands in this area, you can't have a solar farm. So to me, I would prefer to keep your standard buffers, whatever you decide to do. And just, if somebody has a piece of land that it's not appropriate for, then it's just not appropriate for that particular purpose. Because you're already limiting use of people's lands anyway, in certain aspects.
Right, because I think like that last comment about like it's not appropriate because we have visual things we've talked about, relative to the height of it and all that, or elevation, right?
I mean, you could have a piece of land that just the way it's shaped is just not appropriate with the buffers,
It's just not,
then the people have to turn around and build a house on it, have a house or something.
Well, I just personally think that there are places in town where these facilities just shouldn't be. Period. And really all that leaves is the more rural parts of town where they can be located. The general development districts are too small. Unless, the town decides to put something on the landfill, for example. But
Well, the slope of the landfill, I don't think you put it on there either. I think your slope's too great over there.
And also, it might be pretty visible from the nearby subdivision.
right?
So, and like I say, you say you think this place is that they're not appropriate. Well, like I said, there's a lot of residents in this town that don't think they're appropriate anywhere. in this
Right,
town.
no, I know.
So you got to take that into consideration.
At the same time, we can't prohibit them either.
Can't prohibit it,
Right.
but we can come up with the regulations that they have to follow, whether it be
Absolutely.
150-foot setback or 75-foot setback. Everybody has to follow it. Either your land conforms to this or it doesn't.
I could live with 125 feet.
Oh,
Yeah,
I like,
thank you. So,
Say so.
so, yeah, thanks so much. I think that's a really good discussion. For the record, I could live at 125 feet, and I think, and knowing that we're gonna have more things to discuss relative to one of the most important topics besides that was the screening things that we're going to be talking about. I think together, that's gonna add up to be the powerful combination, not just one, not just the other, right?
Because that way, if you have it 125 feet, you've got the options
Correct.
for the types of screening. You can give people options.
Yeah.
So that, if you can't do all this wooded buffer.
Yep.
You can put up a fence, you can put up earth and berm with a few trees on the top to help get the height up or whatever.
Whatever.
It gives you the options.
so,
I want to make sure, go ahead, sir.
I would say 125 feet from the property line. And whichever is bigger, that or the distance from the closest dwelling. We said that from the closest dwelling, it have to be 250, isn't it?
Right.
Yes.
So if the dwelling is right in 10 feet from the property line, then the setback have to be 240
Right,
And that would be just on one side of the
on
property.
one side of the property.
right,
Right.
right.
So
Well, actually,
whichever-
it'd be one corner of the property.
Right,
so it would be
Right, like that.
whatever the two is bigger. Like the
right.
150
Right.
from the
Mhm.
property line or the 250 from the closest building.
Right,
Road,
Road.
private road and road.
Yeah, right.
right.
And my question is, I assume we still want to keep the 150 setback for the transformers and inverters,
Yes,
because that's based on the electromagnetic field.
right. So maybe you heard that before.
I've heard.
Yeah. So that was stats that we got from some other states that done that. So,
So all those conditions have to be there, whatever is the biggest. Those two conditions about the distance from
Yep.
the
Yeah,
dwelling, the distance from the unit of the transformers to the dwelling, or the distance from the property line being 150 to the
right.
edge of
The
that.
most stringent's gonna apply.
That's right.
and so I want to thank you again for doing the chart
Sure.
and putting together the table to
Sure.
describe, because that to me was a very helpful thing to sort of see how that could work.
Oh, believe me, it was to me too, when I
Yeah.
started looking, I said, oh my
Oh,
God.
The only thing you'll have to put in for exemption in there though is your transmission lines and road going in. Your transmission lines are gonna be hard assets, and obviously they're gonna have to come off a road somewhere,
Right,
Yeah,
so, and again.
Yeah.
We'll have to be exception to that.
good point.
Peter, can I ask a question?
Please,
George,
yeah.
your drawing, George, it may be just that it's not totally to scale.
this one,
Yes. It's got 150-foot dotted line, 100-foot in the corner. And then it's 250. Just a little ways further. Am I to assume that it's from the corner of this house to that arc is 250?
yeah. In fact, the arc is based on the closest two corners.
Mhm.
So you take a compass and create a 250-foot arc. And so to, let's say, the north or whatever that. And then you take one from the lower corner on the same side, and you create another 250 arc. And that's why on that lower, where it abuts the public road vegetative buffer and setback, it actually extends to the left further than what it does to the in the other direction. So that you have a uniform 250-foot buffer everywhere from that
Residents.
residence. Did I explain that, Rich? Okay.
I think I. it was
So
more the
all I
idea-
did was, at this corner of the house, I took my compass, measured out to 250 feet. I did an arc. The 100 was that I experimented with 100 feet first. That's only, it's irrelevant, basically. And decided that wasn't good enough. And then I did the same thing. I took my compass and did that lower corner, abutting corner, and did the same thing. And that's how I determined the extent of the buffer, and I squared it off.
Yeah, just the thing that messed me up a little is that we got 250 and not too far away, you got 100.
Yeah,
So,
right,
geez, you got
yeah,
150 feet between those two numbers, and I knew that couldn't be the case.
yeah, no, that 100 feet you can ignore, because I originally, the dotted line was my first thought on. I wanted to see what that would look like,
Mhm.
and I was too lazy to use a piece of paper.
So for setbacks, we've at least talked about, and I think have agreed upon a number. Right, excellent. I think, is it next, I think, because this goes hand in hand with the visual, either the screening or the visual impact assessment, or how do we want to talk about that aspect? Because we've gotten into,
Say visual, Peter, you're talking about buffers.
I think the answer would be yes,
Yeah, visual.
because
vegetative
they go
screening.
so hand in hand with one another.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the thoughts I have is we need to develop some kind of method or requirement that actually provides a vegetative buffer versus 8 or 10 trees and you see right through them, that depending on the visibility, and that would be part of the visual assessment, I guess. We need to be able to tell persons, it's not just trees. You got to provide a screen and 10 maple trees spread apart isn't going to provide much of a screen. We need to make sure, maybe I don't know if we can do it so that we're flexible.
Could I ask a question? Just gonna toss out a word. Are we trying to come up with something that would conceal? The facility from other things, or mitigate,
Obscure.
obscure, okay, so not conceal.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna be able to conceal anything 100%.
I also agree, which is why I just want to make sure we're talking about this at a high level now.
That's why I was saying 80% obscuration. Basically, just, they use that when they do the second discs on the lakes, it's obscuration, how much you can see through the algae blooms, how deep you can go.
Yeah.
And I think, again, if you can build a buffer, you can use options. You can use evergreens, if you're gonna do a forested evergreen area, because hardwoods in the winter, I do that.
Yeah.
It needs to be done so that it's 80% year round. It's denser in the summer because you've got some trees that leaf out and stuff, great. But in the winter, no less than 80%. So you either use wooded buffer, berms, or fencing. And if you use fencing, then you plant, beautification landscaping for native trees. It's not just to make it look better, but the fencing, the solid fencing, that's what takes care of your seaming.
I don't know, so what do you all think about some of that? I'm kind of wondering about how to, I don't know, trying to think about you.
You think about me?
Yeah, if someone says 80%, is it arguable at any point? So I want to make sure that we have in place the right tools that doesn't make it subjective, right? Make it something that we can go by.
I think the visual impact assessment would determine, wouldn't it, based upon what we saw from Steve and his colleague. They could determine what buffer would provide an 80% or 85, whatever we're gonna go with. I think that their software, it seems as though would provide us with the information needed to say, yeah, listen, this is what you need to plan so that year round, the 80% obscurity.
There should be software out there that 2 years from now, if somebody's complaining, I see too much of it, that you should be able to go up and take a photo of that section where they're looking for it. And they should digitally be able to run that through a computer. And it should be able to tell you what you can see through it. It's no different than when you take a picture and you can take out the car in the background.
Yeah.
There's computers and programs out there that can do it.
Yeah, my new phone does that.
Well,
You can wipe
the
out-
gentleman from Gray that had the high tech, the landscaping company had the high tech software.
Yeah,
To me,
these guys that go
he
doing
can do
landscape,
that.
they should come in because the neighbor will go, I don't want to see that. So they'll come in and design,
Right,
and there should be programs for that.
The difficulty with vegetative screening, even if done well, is if you go the route of, let's say 80%, obscure vision through by 80%, is, it's like a farce, it changes with time. And even if you go with conifers, and I'm, you know, on a field, we're gonna be requiring planting. If it's a wooded site, we're gonna require probably retaining of the existing woodland. If you have mature woodland, are we gonna require additional planting? I mean, because
You may have to, if they're gonna clear cut anyway, to put it up, they may have to clear 50 feet and put a little more evergreens on the inside of the.
and I'm fine with that. But I'm just saying 20 years out, I mean, these facilities, you know, will have a lifespan 20, 25 years. We don't know really. Some of them may be upgraded as they go and will have a longer time of lifespan. We just, at this point, we just don't know. But, you know, over that time span, that vegetative buffer, that vegetative screen is going to change in terms of what percentage it obscures from, say, the property line or from a residence.
Well, if it's maintained and it doesn't die off, it should get thicker rather than.
Well, and it's going to be, the boles of the trees are at older ages, what's going to provide the screen, not the vegetation.
Right.
It almost depends on what you want.
And anyway, it's something, you know, I don't think it would be reasonable to require them to constantly be adding to or a vegetative screen that we approved at the beginning of the project.
Well, that's when you give them the option if you don't want to have to maintain it, because I did everything maintained for the life. So,
Well, I agree with maintaining it and not allowing them to cut anything unless it's a hazard tree or something like that. I mean, I would be opposed to even them cutting snags, but
well, that's why I said it would be great to give them the option if you don't want to have to deal with replanting and making sure this, put in your berms or put in solid fencing. They have the option up front to do it either way, but you have to maintain this visual impact for the life of the solar farm.
yeah.
But with the berms, now you have another instance of runoff, right? So we have a whole new runoff issue for their self berm.
Again,
Well, and unfortunately with berms, a lot of people, particularly those sound barriers types, a lot of people find those objectionable
We do
Okay.
different wavelengths.
visually.
Yeah, visually and different wavelengths. You cut out some, but have unintended consequences of other wavelengths. It's a thing. We can work with it though.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of giving people options. It's just, like I said, the people just don't want to look at these solar farms. You know, if we find a way to hide them, at least 80% of, so they don't have to look at them.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna get a lot less complaints in this town.
Okay, so it's not concealment, it's like looking for that way to cover it up 80%, right?
I don't think you're gonna cover up 100% of the time. You'd have to put them surrounded by all walls.
Right. And then is that any better?
I mean, you know, one lesson we've learned, or at least I think I've learned, since being on the board, is that the existing planting standards we have, when somebody either before they even come to us cuts down every tree on the property, or develops in a field for some kind of commercial activity, is that our vegetative screening pretty ineffective, really. It doesn't do anything to mitigate, you know, mitigate the visual impact to passersby. It doesn't improve the appearance of Belgrade as a town. The ones we've approved are probably just as ugly as the ones we didn't approve.
The trees died and nothing happened after.
Yeah,
Right.
with the exception of places like that was a wooded lot and they retained the bulk of the woodland between 27, like the storage facility next to the health center, or the health center for that matter. it almost sounds like where we're heading though is rather than having set. I mean, I had originally proposed 200, well, 250-foot vegetative buffer from our residence. A 200-foot vegetative buffer along the road, public road. And I've since changed my thinking about this, but, and a 50-foot vegetated buffer along common property line with an approved subdivision. But it almost sounds like we're heading more in the direction now of relying on the visual impact assessment to determine if a buffer is needed, a vegetative buffer is needed, and how
How much of it?
how deep it needs to be and how it's constructed to provide the developer with more flexibility, whether it be an a landscape earthen berm or I mean, my original thought was, let's learn from our mistakes in the past and require all plantings to be of nothing but conifers. You know, so that, because it does the best job, at least early in their life stage, of obscuring, providing visual obscuration, whatever.
Making it more.
What's that word?
Is it obfuscate?
Obscuration, thank you.
Well, we can still keep those numbers you just gave out, because I agree with them. But still, just throw in the 80%.
Yeah,
obscurity.
right.
So just keep those and just add in 80% obscurity from public ways and residences, not all the way around.
Sold.
Yeah, I could live with that.
I think so, and then-
And as long as the developer maintains that, and if we have a problem, make sure you write it into this particular ordinance, that they're gonna be fined so much per day or per month if they don't go back and fix it.
Well, actually, that's the select board's job.
Yep.
You folks established the.
And that's fine too, as long as
the fee.
You guys can be.
I
the
didn't know,
head-
I didn't know if it had to be in this.
It doesn't, and it shouldn't,
Okay.
because we're not the enforcement.
Well, except that in the ordinance, elsewhere in the existing ordinance, there's language that select board will establish those.
Okay, and that it should be in it, because that way we can have code enforcement officer, somebody complains,
And that way we-
goes out and we've got some teeth behind it rather than,
Yes.
you know.
I was gonna say, and also with that, we wouldn't have to go running around changing the ordinance amendment wise if the select board decided you wanted a bigger fee. It's in the ordinance and we're about to it until the town amends it. But
Yeah.
And that makes,
Yeah, it does.
but as long as there's some kind of language so we can find a way to enforce it.
So
Good point.
are we saying 80% obscurity based upon visual impact assessment? That language kind of.
I believe, that was what I was thinking, what our conversation just
The
said,
gist, I just wanted to make sure that I was following along.
which then puts a reliance on the visual impact assessment being done. And we're assuming it would be done properly and give the data. So we can say, oh,
So the numbers would be the minimal of a vegetative screen.
yes,
And it may achieve the 80%, it may not. If not, then they have to provide additional mitigation measures, or
Yes.
whatever
yes,
the right term is.
And the only other thing you're probably gonna have to determine is that percentage viewed from X number of feet from the property line, because again, you're gonna have to look at height. You know, if these panels are what, 7, 8,
12 isn't a number.
10, 12 feet
Maximum.
high,
Maximum.
then whatever planning needs to be able to grow
to meet that.
to at least meet that, if not exceed it by a couple of feet. You know, so they're gonna have to, they have some low shrubs, they'll have some stuff that'll grow a little higher, and they'll have some, you know, some
Trees.
cedars or some bigger trees that are gonna grow
Mhm.
canopy in too, so.
Mhm.
But I've noticed like in Augusta, if you go look at what they've been planting around there, they're putting these little bushes in. Yeah, those things.
Yeah, no, it's.
Right.
It's nothing.
It's still.
Right.
50 years from now, you have one on the right going into town.
Right, they're across from the gun range.
50 years, there won't be a buffer with.
Yeah.
Well, I also heard Augusta, the city of Augusta is putting in, you know, where the shamrocks were stumped and in the snow and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Just before Skyleaf and Savings.
Yep.
There's like 3 fields right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are all gonna be solar farms.
Oh, really?
Really? They're
Yeah.
small.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
how are you
When you
gonna,
combine them together, I bet there's probably close
so how are
to.
you gonna, how are you gonna obscure them in a situation like that? I mean,
But see, your ordinance, those fields have such slopes
Yeah.
that I don't think they meet your criteria.
Probably, yeah, I would tend to agree. you know.
That's the problem. We're starting to get so many of these everywhere.
Yeah.
And if they wanna keep them in the cities, that's fine. I'm fine with that.
This town's a tourist town, a vacation town. You start putting those like a Augusta coming all the way out through 27. it's pretty-
I'm think through some of the mechanics here. Your point is a good one. Where is the measurement taken?
Mhm.
You know, I don't know anything about those visual assessments other than the presentation and the examples we've been given to review, but, so I don't know.
Yeah, you might want to talk to a landscape architect on that.
They already came in.
We did.
But I'm saying, ask them that question. If you want to obscure 80% of this, where do we want to do that
Yeah,
view from?
I think that the answer is gonna be, when you're not looking at it from the perspective of a hilltop that everybody stops and takes their pictures from in town. It is, probably at the property line.
And probably, because we're more concerned with the abutting property owners,
Yeah,
what they see.
because, you know, you say the house, the property owner may not allow them on their property.
Right. Yeah.
To do the measurements. I don't know, it's something worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And so we haven't quite decided yet either, have we, about from the lakes? The visual assessment. Have we decided on how much you'll be able to see from the lakes?
We haven't yet. We
Right,
need
yeah,
to.
because we did
Yeah,
talk
we-
about
we-
that,
Yeah, but we
Last
haven't
time?
decided anything.
right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's a good point. And
So the visual assessment is gonna be from the property lines. I would say property lines.
mhm.
Plus, I mean, we're not gonna wanna see it from the lakes. I mean, not a full blown.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think the 80% for the property line would be one bullet point. And then you're gonna have to have a separate bullet point for distances.
Yeah.
From the lakes or a mountain or wherever you're gonna see it from. I think that's a
Yeah,
separate bullet point.
I mean, one of the things, at least I got from that presentation was, there's science to it in terms of the technology, the GIS technology and the other LiDAR and the other technologies that they use. But the conclusion to reach is heavily art, you know, and perception.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no standardized methodology. You know, there's no industry standards, there's no best management practice. There's a DEP regulation that provides a little bit of that, but it's 20 years old. And we've incorporated that, you know, and to provide a little bit of standardization, but a lot of the firms that offer this aren't even landscape architects.
and you know, the point about the lakes and stuff, because this is one thing we talked about before. If you're outside of Belgrade on the lake, you know, we can't regulate that, but you
Right.
might see it.
Right.
Right, but then, okay, you're motoring back towards the shore and, okay, I guess maybe if we've done everything right, then when you get into Belgrade waters, then perhaps you wouldn't see it. But I'm just saying
Yeah,
that that is a,
The problem is,
Complexity.
from far off, you're never gonna grow trees tall enough if you get at the right elevation
right,
to be able to hide.
right.
So,
But we have to do our best with what we know of. And that was part of the reason, well, one of the reasons anyway, when we said, you know, we don't want them at high elevations because then that that makes it so much more difficult to have them obscured from low places, right?
The best place for them is a large acreage area that's all woods. There's an example, Cecily's property over off West Road by my house, where Al used to live. Or bought that 200 acres or whatever, go out in the middle of that, leave a couple, 200-300 feet wooden buffer all the way around it, and put in your solar panels. It's fairly flat in there, nobody's ever gonna see it, and it's a perfect place for it. You get into some of these areas that are on hills, and you're gonna see them, it'd be like somebody put in solar panels up there where 8 and 11 split,
Right.
off to the right, overlooking the lake.
Yeah.
It's not an appropriate place for this.
Mhm.
So don't carry that 20% right onto our lakes.
What was that?
I'm sorry, Craig?
Do we carry that 20% viewing right onto our lakes, anything over 20%?
Like the slope of the land?
No, 20%, we got 20% obscurity now, right,
80%,
80%. So you can
20%,
see 20% of it,
Oh.
so do we carry that same thing on
I
our
see.
lakes?
That may be too much. Too much visibility.
Even less?
That's correct.
10%?
What I was thinking, I went back and looked at, I know we're jumping around again and I apologize, but, okay, so we already incorporated or tentatively incorporated it into, the ordinance that visual site assessment will be done and how it will be done and what needs to be submitted to the planning board. And then we have yet to get to the point of when is that assessment, the findings of that assessment acceptable? And one of them is going to be this 80% from the property line.
Mhm.
And I had wondered about whether two things. I was going to suggest a rebuttable presumption that, the list of items places in town that we came up with that we've kind of decided those are, key viewpoints or whatever the right term is. If it's visible from those places, then unless they can prove otherwise through mitigation measures, that doesn't meet the visual impact standard that's already in the ordinance, that we have to make a positive finding about, how we go through the findings back.
Yeah.
No reasonable visual impact.
Right.
Well, this says, if we can see it from those places, including the lake, then you should assume that we're probably going to deny your permit.
Yeah.
I went back and thought about that more based after Mr. Dewan's presentation and wondered, particularly from the lakes, if that was really reasonable because of what we've been talking about here, that you're gonna, because as you said, no trees are going to be tall enough to totally obscure some of these facilities. What the right way to get at that? And I thought about a percentage like we were just describing. And I thought, well, if it's a large facility, whatever the percentage is, could be a lot of acreage. So I was thinking maybe saying something like an acre. The way I processed it in my own head was, okay, what would it, if somebody built a house in that same location, and cleared the yard all around it and stuff, how big would that be that would be visible? It's usually not more than an acre. So let's make it equivalent to a new residential home.
So not see more than that.
Yeah, so that, if there's a corner of the facility that's going to be visible from Mezzalonsky, that not be more than an acre.
That's interesting. Because in a larger facility, I'm gonna say an acre's worth would be a small percentage that would
Right.
still be seen, right? And it's not like if you just see a little bit of it, you're out. But we're trying to keep it really contained to a small amount. but yet not prescribe or try to come up with a mathematical algorithm that would determine what that would be in all cases. It's just,
Not only that, that would deter people from actually putting on slopes.
yeah,
Because if that one up here was all on flat ground, even from Messalon's, Great Pond, you probably wouldn't see it. But if you're down here on Great Pond and the thing's sloping this way, you got trees here. The first half of it, you're probably not gonna see. It's the upper edge that you're gonna see.
right.
So if you limit it to, you can only see an acre of it, the equivalent of an acre, however, that you're gonna determine that whether by, some kind of aerial photo you can do.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
right, exactly, or the
Visual.
Right.
view shed analysis that they do.
At that distance, whatever it was.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how the rest of you think about that. Maybe you might think it's flawed, but.
I just have a question about the acre. If you see no more than an acre, would it make, don't want to make things complicated, but if you were 3 miles away and saw an acre worth of panels versus your 500 feet away, I'll give it 1,000 feet, and you see an acre of panels, visually wise, I'm not sure that, place that might have 2 acres, 3 miles away is less intrusive than the 1 acre close by.
Yeah, no, that's very true. It doesn't take that into account.
But I would say 1 acre from Belgrade Waters.
Or whatever points your designated areas. that you're not-
Yeah, we had that handful of,
Yeah, out by the golf course or,
Right.
Yeah.
certain areas that you don't want to.
1 acre from Belgrade Waters and I
Because I think the closer you get to it, the more your buffer that you're putting in around it is gonna take effect.
That's right.
that's the,
The
that's the,
closer you get, that's what you're close to that, you're gonna see the trees, the farther back you get when you're taking the chances.
it's exactly right. That's exactly the outcome of what we've talked about so far. So,
I mean, I was just trying to recognize Mr. Dewan's point that
You said it was only
it's
between.
almost impossible to totally obscure
right,
these facilities, just like the same with wind
Yep.
and other types of, I think he had an example for, I can't remember, if it's a warehouse or a store. No, it was a store in Freeport.
yes, yeah. that was his-
I thought you said also that those view shed analysis were good between, was it a mile to 3 miles, wasn't it?
Yeah, up to 3, I think.
Yeah.
So I like that idea from Belgrade Waters, right? Then
What do you
Okay.
think, Rich?
I'm going, that's fine.
Well, and I would say it shouldn't be just the lakes. I think it should be those other viewpoints that we identified.
exactly,
Included with those.
yep, because those are,
You know, like the hill on top of Jack Sutton's or wherever. I,
Yeah.
I still like your thought, Rich, of, where do people in town take pictures? I think that's a,
Yeah, I mean, how many
Rational
rational
way
way
to
to
look at it.
golf course to do wedding photos?
many,
right, exactly.
that's,
Or as Anthony told us, when he was interviewing for the job or came on a visit or something, that was one of the first places he was taken.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain places in Belgrade that, people count on for the view.
they're iconic, when you come here, that's the scene.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's an inclusive thing, right? So it's the waters of Belgrade and those lists of
Other
places,
other designated spots.
right, which we've identified, that I think we have a pretty good list of
And
them,
that's not to say there won't be others depending on the
Correct.
site.
right?
If
So,
we end up including Minot Hill Road on our list, or we just extract that because it was out of public.
Which,
Minot Hill,
yes, we
is
did.
that still on our list?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Becky would kill me if we didn't put it on.
right,
I don't know how many pictures she's taken of the field, the hay bales in the field.
George takes pictures of the deer.
Yeah.
That too.
Well, I think the fact is you're doing the Salt Church there, I've seen people on Monday go taking pictures up
Yep, that too.
at the church.
Yeah,
So
that too. That's right. Particularly when it's lit up and
I saw one guy taking a picture one night, quite a picture. I was just getting home and it was just dark enough so that the moon was out and the moon was bright red. And it was sitting at the top of the tip of the steeple.
Cool.
It was just, wow, it's like.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so, oh, thank you. So we talked about a couple of real important things. So setback and visual screening, that conversation has gone well. Let's see. Where are we?
Left off on page 9. I don't know if you got the Doherty version or the KB.
You did write down in the notes too about the indirect routes into this. About the transmission lines of the road, right? You have that written.
That was your point, yeah.
Just wanna make sure you got it written down somewhere so it doesn't get forgotten.
We're gonna have, yeah, minutes. Here, we'll capture it.
so it's the next item on our list of fencing.
I think so. Carrying around so much paper, so many packages. from- I apologize.
You know, one thing we haven't talked about, well, I hate to be a party pooper, but is if a buffer has to be planted, how do we, what do we want to require in that planting? Rich mentioned, gave some thoughts earlier. In my memo, I had provided some thoughts as well. Because that's part of the visual screening requirement.
So did we want to reference some standards that we could employ?
Well, like I said, my personal opinion is that the standards that we have in the current ordinance are inadequate. Have not proven to be very successful. So I think it needs to be something more robust than that. And well, I can even read if you don't have it in front of you, what I had proposed, if that would be helpful. It's on page 4 of my memo to the board.
And is that like around C, paragraph
Yes,
C?
C.
Yep.
C, D, and D.
Just 1 second, George. Craig, did you find that one page? Okay. Rich, do you have that page?
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, you good? Let's go,
You want me to read it?
please.
Okay, so see, on sites which lack existing woodland, the planned vegetative buffer shall be planted to the same dimensions as stated above. So those were the ones that we just described. And sufficient to provide year-round visual screening. The buffer shall consist of a mixture of native conifer tree species and understory trees and shrubs. Trees shall be a minimum of 6 feet in height at the time of planting and spaced no more than 30 feet apart, with shrubs and understory trees filling all gaps between the future overstory trees. Trees shall be planted in alternating rows to achieve an effective visual screen. And we could add in there that 80%.
I would add that, and I probably would think that you want to add in that they must be up at the height that you want them within X number of years. That way it encourages them to make sure they plant the bigger trees, some bigger trees. I would give them maybe 3 years to meet that 80%. Because obviously when you plant stuff, you need it.
Yeah.
Right, some of
Uh,
them.
It's gonna take some time to get that 80%. They should have to meet it in X number of time, so many years or.
We can raise the height of the and 6-foot trees.
So, yeah, I dealt with that a little differently, but it may not be adequate. So it goes on, all shrubby plant material shall be at least 3 feet in height at the time of planting, and the species selected will grow at least to 5 feet at maturity. A planted vegetative visual screen shall be maintained over the lifespan of the facility, with all plantings that die replaced as soon as growing conditions allow. Some of that comes from the existing language in the ordinance, but I embellished on it.
You think it will be of any benefit that we asked some feedback from the resource center on that,
From who?
the resource center? The,
Oh, the lakes.
yeah. Because we were having a conversation just recently about what are the best trees to contain the stormwater going into the lakes. And,
Yeah.
a conversation about that one, that hemlocks were like the standard on that.
I mean, any vegetative buffer is gonna have some abating of impact on stormwater, but this is specifically primarily just for visual, to mitigate the visual or reduce to 80%. The obscure by 80%, the visual impact, where we are requiring, we're, around residences, and along the roads, and if it should be required to be planted along the property lines.
Right.
When we get, if we need to talk in the future about stormwater runoff and phosphate, your suggestion is a good one. If you think they might have something to offer in a way. But I should note that I went to the site location development law, piece,
Did.
sort of, next level step up, and to see if they had anything that I could borrow. And I did borrow a few things from them, like the 6 feet height.
Yeah.
But I didn't take it directly from them.
So thank you, George. You had a comment and I had a comment after you and Rich. So Craig,
So yeah, we'll add in the 80% visual there. And we could just, everything else looks pretty good. We can bump the height up to 8-10 feet. So a little bigger,
Are trees like that available from, they are?
especially balsams, because you have these Christmas tree farms that have overgrown trees.
I'm fine with that. To be honest with you, Becky's cousin's a landscape architect down in Massachusetts, and I talked to him. He grows landscaping stock, and he said, yeah, for most of he does a lot of work on universities, and he said most of the time we're planting 6-footers, but
That's common, don't get me wrong.
yeah, no.
But
But I wasn't sure what was available on the market.
If you want to have it done in a reason, have it matured high enough for what you want in a reasonable amount of time.
because we're at 12-foot panels.
Panels.
Some of his clients have more money than God out on Cape Cod. They plant full-size trees.
They're available. And now the federal government's throwing more money at these solar people. They just came out with things with more incentives for them. So if they're gonna throw money at them, if they have to spend it, they have to spend it.
I'm okay with increasing the size as long as we know that they can buy them.
right.
Well, my comment was, I think we need to build in, we talked about this before, I think, flexibility, whether that's, the developer could argue back to us, I can build this buffer without planting, trees. Go back to the Terry Dewan demonstration where the solar farm was on a hill sloping this way. And the road was here, and bushes 5 feet tall would have enabled that facility to be buffered.
Yep.
Do we want to make them plant trees just because that's what our rules say?
Well, the next one, D. Says where no vegetation, we can take out no vegetation can be grown. And just keep in unique site conditions. The planning board may approves visual screening, consistent fence, walls, berms, or combination, or, you know, if it's just natural.
To achieve the 80% obscurity,
You know,
right? Because is that the flexibility we want, right? To say that there might be cases where they would say, well, we don't do the slope or whatever. You know, we don't need to plant trees. I think as long as the planning board has a way to say, okay, as long as you can achieve the 80%.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, that was my
obscurity.
point.
Yeah,
You know, we can have this prescriptive planting buffer, may not do what it's intended to be. But if the person, you know, gives, if we have the allowance for someone to come to us and say, this is gonna provide the 80%
Mhm.
without planting native trees, red spruce and whatever.
right.
So D was taken right out of the existing ordinance, so that's no, you know, that language already exists, but could certainly be modified like Craig suggested. Another alternative, and I didn't put this in the memo because I wrote all this before we heard from Mr. Dewan, was to, because Rich has mentioned this before, and I was thinking about it, is I came up with some additional language that may or may not be appropriate, but so it would actually be an F, so it would be an add-on to all of that, and here's what I came up with. The planning board may approve of an alternative equally effective visual screening to that specified above. So again, it would be 80%. But only when supported by the findings of a visual impact analysis conducted in accordance with the requirements of this ordinance and its associated visual impact mitigation measures.
That's great.
Sounds
That's,
good.
that's tight. That's tight.
So we could add that as F.
Yeah.
Or-
Anything in there that gives them options as long as it maintains what you're looking for.
Well, and equally as stringent.
And we'll keep on pointing back to that.
Yep.
You know, 80% as determined by the visual impact assessment. Important.
That's
Okay.
all I got to say about planning.
Okay. Thank you, George. So, are we then on to, because I'm still on page 4, number 7, so is that where we are?
Mhm.
So vehicle access and electrical transmission routes?
Or
we're not
unless
there?
you want to follow the order in KV cog.
I don't care, whatever, if you have the KV cog one in front of you.
Yeah, I
follow
do.
that.
The next item is fencing.
Okay, so fencing, stand by.
I think it might be, make it easier on Anthony if he's trying to catch up
Yes,
our decisions.
okay, so fencing, what do we have?
I did have a suggestion for fencing. I thought KV cog's language left something to be desired.
Yep.
And it's on page 6 of my memo.
6 of this, okay.
Box 14. It addresses the fact that a number of law ordinances recommend having fencing that doesn't totally preclude animal passage.
All right. Yep, okay,
Steve confirmed that that kind of fencing is readily available. I guess that's his plan to use, is that so-called solid block game fence, which is a brand name, but so that reads, provide safety fencing around all electrical equipment. Fencing shall be solid block game fence or of similar design with 8 by 12 holes at bottom or 8 by 12 holes on bottom, or shall be elevated 5 inches above ground level to allow small wildlife passage.
I'm good with that.
One question related to fencing that I think would be worth discussing is the way we define the solar facility. It isn't clear whether the fencing is considered part of the facility. And Steve Buckbaum in his memo raised this question.
Yeah.
He argued he thought fencing should not be considered, the setback should not apply to fencing. I'm not so sure, but I think we, there are a number of places to deal with this, but this would be one of them. One place, if we want, really, all it comes down to is, do we want fencing to be set back as far as the modules and the other equipment, or is it okay to have it closer to the property lines, for example? Steve's, I'm trying to remember Steve's rationale.
It would be hard to
Something
work.
to do with the road that runs alongside it.
Yeah, that.
If
I
you,
mean, on his particular site, there's some existing gates and other things. I mean, what we come up with here, I believe, will not apply to his facility. It's already approved.
Right.
So, but I didn't know what others thought about that. You know. I hadn't thought about it myself at all prior to his email.
Right.
Yeah.
My thought would have been, if it's a fencing that we're talking about here, I wouldn't have an objection to fencing not having to meet the particular setback from the, like, utility facility itself, but
I don't think it should be right on the property line.
Right.
I would
Agreed.
agree with that. I wouldn't say that it should be on top of the facility. So, yeah, just because these people need to work on the panels and so on.
Oh, right.
Right.
So
Good point.
they're gonna need to have some space to be
Yeah.
able to maneuver the equipment.
Yeah.
So, maybe, I don't know, as close as to the facility can put it on, not on the proper line. But they're gonna need a space to maneuver the equipment around.
Absolutely. Dan?
Well, what I was thinking is, if you had them require the fencing be on the inside of the wooded buffer. Because if your wooded buffer is 100 feet, and you're talking 125 foot setback from the property line for any equipment, that gives you 25 feet from that fence to any equipment anyway. And then allow the fencing to also run down on both sides of the transmission lines all the way to the road. And the same thing, so that it encompasses your access road and the gate, and they could put gates. The one place they could have fencing on a property line would be out at the road where they have to come in, so they could gate it.
Yeah.
That would be just that one section.
So right inside of the
Can we-
buffer.
can we put it, we got property line setbacks. Can we actually put right in there numbers? Setback for fencing?
We could. That would be as good a place as any, if not better.
That would be up to the inside of your property buffer.
Buffer, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Hmm.
What's the downside of doing that?
Not as a good side if we're gonna do that, because when people are looking at their setbacks, it'll be all in the same
Yep.
table.
Mhm.
The one thing though, like for example, when you have a larger setback and visual buffer from, say, the public road, just thinking about what you just said, Dan, that it may be that the fencing will be on the roadside of the, you know, would people find it objectionable to see fencing from the road?
So at that point, you're gonna see the transmission lines going in too. So you're gonna have,
I mean, you can't,
you can't get rid of everything. I mean, you're gonna have some visual impact because your property lines and your road going into it, they're gonna go in. So, I mean, if you had the fence come out to either side, say your road's over here and transmission lines are here.
Right.
The fence comes out on either side of them, so that it encompasses everything in the middle, and they have to, you know, you might have 50 feet of fence.
Right. That is why I wanted to talk about, are we talking about concealing everything or obscuring? That's an important distinction, right? Because, you know, if there's a certain allowance to say, well, this is the necessary evil that has to
You know,
happen.
there's always gonna be instances where you're gonna have, you can't.
So, I think the suggestion is a good one.
so
Can we do that?
100 feet from property lines.
Yes,
So I'm looking at the diagram and saying, as we go.
So to encapsulate the roads and the power lines and stuff, should we put it rather than 100 feet from the property line? So we've established 125 feet. So should we write it as in 25 feet from the equipment?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And it's gonna put it in the same spot. But then when they're coming down the road and your power lines, it's keeping it a certain distance down to the road. Am I correct?
I know what you're saying, it's a matter of finding the right language.
Yeah. That's a good, that's an interesting way to think about it, right?
Yeah, looking at the other, from the other direction.
Yeah.
Because then that takes care of the way it comes down to the road through the meandering.
Yeah, however that is, right?
So it would be like 25 feet from any solar modules or other electrical equipment.
What was it?
Corridors.
Yeah, that is establishing that corridor, really, is what it's doing. Right, around,
Yeah. So you have your road and then the, so it may be 100 feet wide coming down the
Yeah.
road.
Good.
Maybe 75, but it's still gonna be.
So something like, and probably then if we went with this kind, then rather than in the setback, maybe it should be in the section that's specific to fencing. But would this capture, you know, something like fencing would be located 25 feet from any solar module or other electrical equipment except for the access road?
What do you mean, except for the access road?
Well, I was trying to capture what you were describing of it may be necessary, it would be necessary for it to come down the length of the access road to the gate.
Yeah, so if it was 25 feet from the access road, it follow the access road right down. Is what I was trying to.
I'm sure I know.
might be hard,
Infrastructure, any infrastructure,
Transmission corridors and access roads. Yeah, I know what you're trying to say, I just don't want to say it.
25 feet from the outside perimeter of the access road,
I'm sorry.
25 feet from the outside perimeter of the access road. There is right on the outside,
Yeah,
or the
but I
edges,
think one thing we're trying to prevent is them bringing the fencing all the way, say, to the public road. They have the gate at the public
Right.
road. You know, right inside it, and then they have fencing going.
Let's see, it's either that or just not have the fence come all the way out. Just
Well,
So have it so the fencing is no more than 25 feet around any of their hard equipment on the inside. They may have the road going in and have to go to a gate at the fence to go in.
yeah, but then you're creating spots for people to hang out. I would think you'd want a gate down by the road.
You know, you could
Do we
put a-
care about that?
You could put a gate out there, you may just not have that fencing down both sides, but you just gate the road.
Yeah.
If they want to gate the road, they can do that.
Well, I don't know, maybe there's not enough places to drink Bud Light.
That's
Belgrade.
But yeah, if you just go, say either 100 feet in from your property lines or 25, a maximum of 25 feet away from your equipment, that way they don't extend into the.
I mean, the only reason, and maybe they would have multiple gates, you know, but, I mean, the only reason for the fencing from their perspective is to secure and prevent, vandalism to their equipment.
Right.
They're not gonna wanna put it up more fencing than they need to.
So they may not want to go all the way up.
Right, yeah.
Just have their fencing stop at a gate, because I do a lot of substations for Person up in Bangor. And they'll put a gate out at the road with turn off, just a pipe gate,
Yeah, right.
and then you drive in, and then they got the perimeter fencing.
Yeah.
And it's usually within so many feet of the building and all their electrical generated towers and stuff.
So maybe keeping it a little simpler, just 25 feet from the equipment, electrical equipment. Is,
Maybe that's sufficient.
So
Let's try it.
I would either do that or just at 100 foot
Yeah.
from the property lines,
Mhm.
because that's gonna be on the inside of your buffers.
Yep.
That still gives them 25 feet, because your equipment's 125 feet in.
Right.
So we
you've got
wanna,
25
we
feet
wanna
there.
have a fence system that encircles the facility by leaving a 25 feet clearance to the equipment all around,
yes.
right?
So locate that in 14 or little, not 14, but in replacement language for F.
Good question.
So we have the provision, provide safety fencing, blah, blah, blah. And how it's supposed to be installed, and then we could add fencing shall be located within 25 feet of solar modules and other electrical equipment.
I was thinking that would be appropriate for 14. That was just my way of thinking. I don't know if other people object, that's fine.
The wording on that, I think is gonna be a little complicated for them. Because say you've got your solar farm like this, and then you've got a storage shed over here, you're gonna make, your fencing's gonna have to do this, if you're within 25 feet. When they start doing all these,
Well, if we limit it though to electrical equipment,
well, what I'm saying, I think it would be simpler for them if you just say at the 100-foot buffer mark, because then they could just put, if it's a square piece of property, they could put a square fence around it. You may have 50 feet from this corner to the first piece of electric equipment, but you may have a building over here that has their storage, everything else that's, you know, closer to the fence. If you say within 25 feet of the equipment, you may have to come down and go in and go this way.
oh, I see. what you're
Jeez,
saying.
yeah.
So if you just do 100 feet, you know, at the 100-foot mark on the inside of your buffer, whether it be a berm or whatever.
Yeah.
And that still gives them a minimum of 25 feet to any piece of equipment. They could have 50 feet for a piece of equipment, but
Yeah.
I agree with that.
In the end, that's maybe the thing that we'll have to settle on. Yeah.
So instead, we would say something like fencing shall be located inside the required somewhere in setbacks. the required visual screening.
Yeah, because I mean, that's where you're gonna require visual screening up to. Well, you don't may not have to, in some areas, they may just have the wall, so I just go 100 foot. I just go with 100 foot setback.
For the fence.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the easiest thing for them to deal with.
I mean, we don't really care where they put it as long as it isn't blatantly visible.
Right. And we know they have to get equipment around, so as long as it's not interfering with
Yeah.
that.
But if you don't want it on the outside, because you don't want to look at it. But if you say, all right, put it anywhere within that 100 foot, I think they're gonna fight with, trying to run it through areas they're trying to plant. Now you got planting on both sides of the fence and everything else.
Yeah.
So I think if you just say 100 feet, because they can't do anything in that, up to that 100 feet anyway.
Yeah.
They may be able to clear that other 25 foot for that 125 foot. So now they've got an area that they can put the fence at.
So something as simple as this, would this work? Fencing shall be located inside the required visual screen.
That, but you really could be, that may put the fencing, 50 feet from your property line if they don't end up with 100 feet of. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, that's up to you guys.
I can,
George, can you read that again?
Fencing shall be located inside the required visual screen.
The only point I make is some people may interpret that as being inside. Not the inside we want, but inside, but we think we have to just make sure that's a little more. clear.
Inside the perimeter of the visual
you're
screen.
on to something. I don't know.
How about fencing shall be located between the visual screening and the and the components of the facility, or
Yeah, but-
electrical components or something.
Yeah.
But with a 50 foot, with 100
Yeah.
feet setback.
Because then they can run it however they want, if they want to run it square.
Right.
If they want to run it different, they
Yeah,
can.
it's up to them.
That's, yeah. Words matter, right?
Oh, yeah,
They
they do.
It's important.
Well, yeah.
And to make it simple for them, somewhere in there, we should put the, an access height gate or something can be installed up at the roadway. It's just, they're gonna be coming, somebody's gonna complain if it's not in there and somebody puts one in and a neighbor sees it, they got one gate out blocking the road. They got, well, the ordinance doesn't say you have that, so.
Oh, because
Make sure-
someone may say, is a gate a fence type of a thing, and like be poking at that, okay.
I mean,
So by allowing.
just allow them to have an access gate.
Yeah.
For the road, somewhere in the ordinance.
Thank you, George. So that was fencing. What's next?
Signage?
Yeah, signage.
The, on the KV cog.
Yeah.
Model.
So it
I
says,
I didn't offer any alternate language for that, other than the, how they just named the facility type, needs to change to be consistent.
so that's 15. Is
So,
that right?
and you may have some sound advice for us on this. Part of this is the signage required to identify the owner of the facility, provide a 24-hour emergency contact number. It also should include a clearly visible warning sign.
Yep, I mean, that's basically kind of the same thing we have to provide when we do 24-hour gas stations.
Yeah.
that are unattended,
Right.
put up, has to have clearly who owns it, phone number, contact.
Right, you know,
So make sure you have all
with,
that.
so first responders had to show up for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I mean, it really wouldn't hurt my feelings if they required somewhere on site, on the inside where people don't have to see it out by the road. If they have hazmat symbols for whatever, any type of chemicals that are stored on site. So we know, let's say you drive up and you have your hazmat triangles, just, because we have big hairy books, the DOT books. And
Right,
fire trucks.
right.
We can go up and look up that symbol and that goes, okay, it's got this on site, we want to back off. We don't want to be anywhere near this.
So,
So,
I don't know what hazardous materials would be on that site.
And
We've already,
I don't know either, that's why. As
yeah,
long as we can find out, you probably should require a Knox box. We probably wouldn't enter unless somebody got trapped inside there for some reason and got hurt, somebody climbed the fence and got hurt.
yeah,
It's nothing to do with the solar panels, there's nobody getting zapped or anything. But we need to be able to get in, just like we have Knox boxes on every commercial building in town.
the model ordinance dealt with that. I can't remember. So we already have requirement that they share with the fire department, the electrical drawings. You know, we'll need to deal with the signage.
Signage, I mean, what you got right now looks pretty good to me. If they have multiple access roads, make sure that the signs are posted on each of them. So, which gates you're coming in, which road you're coming in, you have the same information.
Yeah, I know, I guess I didn't really pick up on that. Oh, no, that's not. Yeah, in my memo, I didn't pick up on that issue of access in the event of, you know, trying to save somebody's life kind of thing.
I mean, like I said, as long as we can just make sure that somewhere that they know they're required a Knox lock, so that we can have a key to a gate if we have to access it for some reason other than something electrical, we aren't gonna go.
Right.
Would it, I'm just thinking from the perspective of the owner, I don't know anything about this, but would language that said something like the applicant shall make provisions for emergency access by Belgrade first responders?
Oh, well,
As determined by the fire chief,
Yeah,
well, that will work.
because that way he can go say, yeah, we want Knox box.
I mean, I don't know if somebody would say, here's the key, you just keep it, you know.
We don't normally do that, 'cause you never know where the key's gonna end up.
Yeah.
That's why I said put the Knox box on there. Belgrade has a key. If it's one key fits every Knox box. When you order a Knox box, it's specific to Belgrade.
Oh,
So
okay.
we have a
I
key
see
in
how
each
that
fire
works.
truck. That we can unlock a box on any building in town, and then all the keys that we need, either elevator keys or anything, are inside that box. So yeah, as long as they're required to make provisions, by according to whatever the fire chief wants. then
Yeah.
We'll do it.
So this is how I wrote it up. The applicant shall make arrangements with the Belgrade Fire Chief to provide for emergency access by first responders.
Mhm.
To add to that at the bottom of that paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
Like I said, the signage, I think everything you put down and makes sense, just make sure that it's in all access.
Yeah, because some may have more than one. I didn't even think of that. until you said
Depending on
it.
how you build your solar farm, if you have a big one here, then they would a steep piece of land, they can go over to the next one. They may have an access road on this side, maybe another road on this side.
Sure.
Coming in, and they have two gates coming in. They may only have one power line, but they may have multiple gates.
There's actually more language to this than I read. I missed it. Goes on to say signage indicating the official E911 address of the facility shall be required to be clearly visible from both directions of travel from the public road or roads in which the facility is accessed. That sounds decent.
Although that particular language is going to put the signs out at the main road versus on the gate.
Yeah, I can't remember which model ordinance. I've seen this in other model ordinances, and the explanation I've seen might be actually Massachusetts. It's so that if a passerby sees a blaze in the woods, they can call it in and give an accurate location.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with it either way. As long as we have access to numbers for somebody to call something. I mean, out here, if somebody sees a blaze in the woods, they're gonna call 911, they're gonna get the general area where they are.
Yep.
And we're gonna show up.
Okay, right.
You know, when you get down into the cities and stuff, where they've got hundreds of these solar farms, you know, or something going on that you may want a more specific address. Either way. You might want to check with the applicant too.
Yeah.
You may have a different preference. As far as the information looks correct.
Well, that's a good point. You know, when we have something to show people, it's, you know, what we think is a good first draft, if you will, we certainly should share it with the fire.
Yeah.
Travis.
I know we did that with the subdivision.
Yeah. Okay, so that was sign.
Next is something we discussed in passing earlier, and that's the visual impact. So this would be the performance standard. And, oh, you know what? I knew there was something else in here. If we could skip over that, because this addresses down in I, it says emergency services. It has language that reads, the owner or operator shall provide a copy of the project summaries, electrical schematic and site plan to the town of Belgrade Fire Chief. Upon request, the owner or operator shall coordinate with local emergency services, develop an emergency response plan. A 3200 series knock box shall be provided and installed by the operator to be allowed, blah, blah, blah.
Yep, that takes care of all that.
Okay, all right. That probably should be moved up
Yeah,
underneath signage,
yeah, probably.
because it really relates all to them. Facilitating emergency response.
Yes.
Exactly.
So anyway, on the visual impact.
Okay. Oh, are we talking about this? Oops. I just have enough.
Page,
So Peter, I actually have some additional language to add to what's in the KV cog model, and that's different than what I originally presented. And
Okay.
Based on once, you know, after we had heard from Mr. Dewan and hand it out if you think that it's worth considering, or
sure.
Yes.
okay.
It's the same page. Same thing.
So
Okay,
where this would go,
This is the back.
that might be yours.
Yes, yeah, no,
oh, yeah, I was getting cheap with paper, so I was reusing,
no.
I was putting recycling paper through the
Yeah.
printer. That's why it's back the stuff, but unfortunately, it's not my grocery list or anything like that. Anything embarrassing. So how this all fits together is in H. Keep that first paragraph, I think a and needs to be added there on the line above the little Roman numerals, but, and then what I've just handed out would be inserted after that. And this is, well, read it for yourselves.
See on this one, you've got 1/2 acre. So-
Yeah, I guess I just quoted myself earlier, but we can talk about that. Probably someone else could come up with a less wordy way to do this, but.
So we have to look at this one, review it. Say it this way.
So, question I have is, the second sentence, scenic resources above grade or significantly degrade the scenic view. Is significantly gonna be arguable. I don't know
Yeah,
how else
no,
you'd
you're
say it.
right. I mean,
How else would you say it, though? I mean,
I
I'm
don't
just
know.
bringing that up as a question. That's
Yeah.
We say have a visual impact from butters property. As opposed to significantly degrade the scenic view. I don't know if that would fit in.
Yeah, it's a
It's-
6 of one, half dozen of the other kind of situation,
Yeah.
I think.
Exactly.
All right.
I think in many ways, what we've already decided upon tonight would be more important in protecting
Yeah.
nearby residents than this,
That one's fine.
but,
I don't know how else you'd say it.
yeah, either one.
A very minor comment. The first sentence in there, would it be better to say, rather than is not to have, just say shall not have?
Sure. I love double negatives myself, but
You know, at some point, if we had a defined list of scenic resources, we could probably just, you know, leave it by stating that. But we are saying it and then spelling it out too, because that's what we have so far. I think that's what Mr. Dewan talked about. He said it'd be good to categorize and sort of package those things up. But for what we have, I think this is really, really good. So let's keep it. Would be my suggestion. And we do talk about the elevation things that we talked about before.
I mean, the only way I could figure out how to deal with that was, you know, say we get an application and, you know, citizens show up and they say, well, geez, I'll be able to see that from over here, and it isn't on our list.
Right.
You know, this gives us the freedom to consider that,
Right,
but it doesn't spell it out specifically.
right. You know, quite frankly, we're working on a timeline. If we had all the time in the world to define all areas that might be impacted by this, maybe we could do that. But right now, we need some flexibility just to make progress, right?
I don't know if you could ever define them all, because who's to
I
say
know.
that somebody doesn't go in it and cut a couple acres between the golf course and this solar farm here someday.
Yeah.
That right now that this particular acreage is blocking the view,
I know.
and then all of a sudden that's gone. You know. So, I mean, as long as you can keep it open so that you can make determinations as the permits come in,
Right.
I think you're better off, because then you don't have to keep rewriting the ordinance.
Sure. Yeah, and we can continue to serve the people of Belgrade because we have the flexibility. So that's good. Excellent. Well, thank you, George.
That's acceptable to everyone.
Does everybody else feel okay with that and the edits that were made?
You're gonna keep that half acre now over. So if you want to-
Yeah, I had
That's fine.
mine as half acre.
prefer to go
I
small.
misstated myself earlier as 1 acre, so. That okay.
I'm good with it.
Rich, what do you think about that?
You have any problems with half acre rather than acre?
I was looking at that. I'm happy. No problem.
Okay, same. Sarah, you
Mhm.
good? Excellent. So that's amended to that language about the visual impact performance standard. Okay.
So we're going out to maintenance conditions.
I think so. Is that right? Maintenance conditions?
Yeah, and I will just, you know, state that, just so we have an idea of the scope of what's ahead of us still. You know, once we get through what's in the KV cog model, there are other things that I thought they missed entirely that I would suggest we discuss at the end.
Okay.
And others may have other suggestions as well.
Okay, so maintenance conditions? Or is that where we are?
Yes.
And then, oops,
In that section, do you want to also add things to maintain fencing and buffer zones?
Oh, and yeah.
Visual
Also
barrier.
say fences.
Says visual barrier measures.
What is that?
So like add visual screening after the word fencing. So where you're
Yeah, I just want to make sure that anything they've got to maintain, and we're gonna end up writing something to enforce it.
Yeah. I mean, they thought to include landscaping, but that's not specific enough, really.
Well, doesn't it say that integrity of security and visual barrier measures? Isn't visual barrier measures screening? I mean, I'll look this up.
Page 10. I think you're right. I think that is consistent. Consists of the buffer material landscape.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I missed that.
Sounds, I mean,
Maybe
it
that's
sounds.
not- Nothing more is needed.
Yeah.
That's a thought.
Good. Anything else on maintenance? No,
Not for me.
okay.
Other than USSF needs to be changed
Yep, yeah,
to usual.
yeah, consistent. And on to modifications?
The only suggested change I have to that is that if they're gonna make a material amendment, or that rather than they go to the code enforcement officer, to be specific, go to the planning board.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was reading it and I was like, well, this is a commercial setup. You know,
Yeah.
I really don't think that it should rest upon my shoulders.
Right.
And
No,
and
no,
there's
I'm
always-
not talking out of work. I'm
And
just
there's
saying-
always the potential that everybody will show up at your house with signs.
Right.
Well, on that, I would just remove the word or, so that it comes to both of you, because then when you're involved too.
That's right. Just keep
Code
up.
enforcement officer and the planning board.
Yeah, you're still.
Okay, yeah, that would work.
That's a good idea.
That could work.
I'm glad I thought of
We'll pay you the big bucks.
that. I know.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next is satisfaction with all aspects of capacity and plans submitted. I guess I have a question. Oh, capacity to finance. See, yeah. Oh. And how are we determining that they have the capacity? Is it because they are submitting sufficient information to us that we would know?
The bond, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't here for some of this, but I assume you require some kind of.
We,
performance
we had talked about some
Yeah.
language that would,
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, it's part of decommissioning.
Right, but again, you could add language in the additional performance bond that proves, if they're gonna buy insurance to cover what they're doing. Something, find some way to make sure that the money is there. So halfway through it.
Seems so there was a couple options and we chose not to go with one because one was,
Yeah, early on, we talked about some of that. I can't remember what it was.
I think most performance bonds increase, you have a rate of cost for decommission that increases every so many years.
So they have to submit as part of the application, proof of their financial capacity to construct and operate. So that would be,
Okay,
a
That would
letter
probably-
from their investors or from their bank or something of that nature. And then under the decommissioning.
So if they have to submit that when they do the application, you basically need to add language to that capacity statement of funds, adding on to it to make them give you another set of financials.
And then as part of the decommissioning, plan, they have demonstrate in the form of an irrevocable letter of credit, a certified check payable to the municipality or a savings account or certificate of deposit naming the municipality as owner for the establishment of an escrow account or other form of financial assurance as may be acceptable to the planning board. Go on, so those are things they're gonna have to submit, so I think it's on that basis that we make that good.
Yeah. So that's all good then, because that would capture it, I think, and allow us to make that determination.
And we did make that one change that the town attorney suggested in the subdivision ordinance.
Good point.
Got a question, it's off topic for me, but take just a second to ask. Talking to some people up in Farmington, that project up there had a bunch of problems. At one point, they were having some financial problems before they could even get it open. And the people that were leasing the land to the solar company were worried if this company went bankrupt, they were gonna be responsible at that point for all of the equipment and everything that's on their land. As far as town taxes and stuff. How does any of this affect that situation?
I think, speaking just for myself, what we've looked at in the KB cog and, you know, some of the alterations we've been making and ones that I've proposed that we have yet to discuss doesn't deal with it at all. Just again, speaking for myself, I think that's, you know, like any other business arrangement, it's between the landowner and the business to work that out under the terms of their lease or their sale or whatever. You know, it's sort of
I just
fire
curious, 'cause
beware
like I
kind of
said, they were
situation.
setting up there, so I was wondering what would happen here if, say, something happened and the company walked away and left the equipment, said, yeah, not our problem anymore. You know, obviously, they're gonna have to have the bond to pull it all out, but in the meantime, people who own the land are now responsible for this. And if it's still producing electricity, then they're responsible for
Yeah.
taxes and or whatever.
I mean, it's not unlike when a landowner leases their land for some other kind of commercial development, you know.
Right.
You
Walks
gotta
away from it
really
as a building.
protect your own interests. I mean, I think our job is primarily to protect the town's interests.
Right, but again, that's part of the town's interest, you know, they're collecting taxes or fees or whatever we're getting from it.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, I was just curious. Eddie.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that, but I guess that's a risk that goes with that kind of development or any other kind of development.
It does.
Question I will have to ask town when it is.
Yeah.
If comes to that. Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah. We definitely haven't addressed that here.
You know, I didn't think so, but I didn't know, you know, playing what you guys been around here. Doing a lot of this a lot longer than I did. I was just wondering if you would. How that worked.
And you know, the proposed facility out on 8 and 11, do you know whether any of that is involved in policing or is it?
They're buying some and I believe they are leasing some. So it's a combination.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
So the ordinance currently requires a lease to be at least 10 years in length. That's an existing requirement. I guess they'll just have a longer lease, it's all, which doesn't matter to us, as long as it's at least that long.
I think when they were talking down here that night, they were buying some, they were leasing some, and they had an option to buy some of the other two. So
You know, Steve Buckstone has an option to buy.
see if he does more in the power and going to the. We got some big properties out over there. Getting access to transmission.
Well, in that case,
Capacity.
Steve and I are friends. Steve mentioned to me that the landowner, this is his way of preventing it becoming a subdivision. He just doesn't want a subdivision across the road.
We'll see if you start to push back on a lot of these solar farms because they just don't have the resources right now.
Right. To ingest all that production.
All the infrastructure they have to put into.
It's a lot.
That's why, like I said, I've heard from CM. There's a bunch of them that are just, they're dragging their feet on.
Yeah. Okay. So where are we there? So that's through page 9 of 9, I guess.
So I think we've gone through everything that Katie Cog proposed.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, I thought there were some things that needed to be addressed in addition to that, in the way of standards that upon which we would base our decision. And one has to do with, and this is probably based on what we've discussed already, is not adequate, but it has to do with vehicle access and electrical transmission routes. I had a number of model ordinances that suggested that you do something to prevent multiple routes going into the same facility. So I'm on page 4, by the way.
Of yours?
And it simply says, vehicle access and electrical transmission routes shall be combined into a single corridor through the required vegetative screening and buffers. It shall be co-located in existing rights-of-way roads or other existing man-made linear features. It doesn't address what you suggested of having it zigzag or so you can't look down the road and see the solar panels.
But that would be a good spot to put that.
Yeah. it would.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that accomplishes two things. It helps get rid of the visual impact, but also if you get a big area on a hill, it doesn't even record over the winter and right down through power lines.
Yeah.
So what's the wording?
Was it something about coming in at a right angle? Is that-
Yeah, well, I mean, when I drew it up, I just put it in using 2 right angles, so you had to come in and so you can determine if you want to do so many feet, and then that makes make a right angle for so many feet, and then another right angle. I'm not sure how to word it, but
There's actually, when you look at the shoreline zoning ordinance in the portion about making paths, where it says you can only have a 6-foot path, and I think it's something to the effect of it has to be meandering, or it has some wording in that ordinance as far as that path, because you can't have a straight path from your house down through the woods. You're not supposed to, right?
Right.
So maybe we can look at that at some point.
Yeah.
Incorporate that. I don't
as
know.
long as
it
you
might
find
have
some
some-
kind of wording.
Yeah, I can't remember what the wording exactly was, but it had something to the effect of basically it had a zigzag.
Meandering.
The transmission lines, I can understand consolidating those, you want those in different directions. Depending on the piece of property, though, if it's a long, narrow piece of property and it butts 2 different access roads already, you may want to allow them to pull one in from the other side. Again, as long as it's not a straight shot.
Yeah.
Whatever variance.
That proposed facility that I was talking about earlier, that's like 900 plus acres out in Bend, and Unity. Parcels are distributed enough that they're linking with a power line to where they're eventually going to connect with the 3-phase power, and they're crossing at least 2 town roads, if not more. So it's kind of,
So you do have access off those town roads.
Yeah.
So you are gonna have more than one access point.
yeah.
So it's probably just gonna have to be somewhere, something in there that usually a variance allows it under certain conditions.
Well, they can always request a waiver, but we still have that language in the existing ordinance.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to show that there's no alternative.
Right.
that kind of thing.
So
gives them an option. If they can pursue.
A simpler question is, should there be a standard for the width of the road? Either maximum.
Boy.
I would come up with a standard that way, but emergency fire truck needs to get in there. You want to make sure it's.
Isn't the standard of 11 meters wide?
I'm sorry,
Isn't the standard to us as any property 11 meters wide?
11 meters. That's 33 feet, yeah, that's pretty wide.
But it might be.
It is in Puerto Rico.
Or this is Puerto Rico said.
Or
You're not
to
Puerto Rico
us-
anymore, Toto.
Well, that they took it from the codes here is what they call it, surveyor code.
Hmm.
It says that to enter any property, you have to have a standard entrance of
33
11
feet,
meters.
I mean, you're talking wide for 27.
Yeah.
So.
is that something like that, that's standard for emergency vehicles?
Nothing you need that wide. I mean, if you had a 12-foot, as long as it's like a 12-foot wide road, I mean, that's more than enough.
Yeah, because it's not like it's gonna have two-way traffic. so-
Right.
We may have to pass each other. Yeah, just not to exceed. We take a number, 20 feet, 25 feet,
25 feet. yeah.
20,
I would say
20, not to
Yeah.
exceed 20 feet.
Yeah, that could work. And
Or
as you were,
what, maybe minimum of 12 and not to exceed 20.
can we try that for a
Yeah.
start?
Yeah,
And did we, you might remember, did we do something like that at all anywhere in the subdivision ordinance? Do we have something about for emergency vehicle traffic?
Well, we do with the turnaround.
Turn.
Yeah, and that was the only place I was thinking, but
you know, I mean,
I don't want to overthink.
you're talking a road that's not really gonna be more than 200 feet long.
Right,
Because if you've got a 100-foot buffer you're driving through and you're gonna go through like
Well, we have
this.
a 250 from the road.
Well,
And if they access.
250s to their equipment though, right?
So, yeah, those
Yeah,
are-
So I mean, you're gonna have an area, once you're already gonna be inside the fence, so
Yeah.
you're gonna have about 200 feet, maybe 250 at the most. Then call it. You know, so I mean,
But like what we got going up there, that's all, that's gonna be a long road. To get in, I would assume, right? 'Cause
I
if you
would
go
think.
Behind Francis Fathiers, you have to go all the way up to there, so it's gonna be a quarter mile, half a mile long. To get up in there.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, if you want to go with this to 20-foot ride, I don't have a problem with going with 20-foot.
They're not gonna build it any bigger than what they.
right.
want to
Right,
spend
so if
money.
you say 20-foot, it'd be 20-foot, if you say 12, they're gonna go 12.
No, a maximum, so like it allows them to. You know, do the maximum and minimum, like we just said, I think that's.
That's probably the way to go.
Yep.
12 to 20.
Yeah, and actually, again, check with them again.
Yeah. Yeah.
The fire chief will be the ones driving fire trucks in there. He may say,
He'd
no, I
know.
prefer the 20-foot road.
I bet you he's gonna say 11 meters.
I don't think he does anything in metric. I know.
You do.
Too bad. So a time check, it's 9:02. Are we okay to stop here?
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
So that was the motion, I second it.
One question I've got before, we leave, because I wasn't here, as far as decommissioning. Are you making them put it back to the way the ground, the property was before it was developed, or are you going with the state standard of only so many feet down in the soil?
I think the way we said it was down to where it was before. 'Cause
Yeah.
it-
So you're returning it to.
And that's what we talked about.
Yeah.
Turning it to its original state.
Yeah.
Which I would prefer to see it that way, because I mean, right now, with these places, some of them are putting in concrete underground and stuff, and they're putting it in low enough so they can come in, just take the steel off and just bury everything.
Yeah.
I would prefer to. It's gotta come out, it comes out, it's gone, it's gone.
We can look at that again, but I was under the impression that what we had tried to do was make sure that it's restored to its state that it was before.
And the other question that we talked about, because I haven't been here, was testing of soil every so often to make sure we're not having compounds leaching in the ground. No, are we requiring that anywhere?
We don't have any.
No.
Yeah, I tried to look into that. Somebody else mentioned, it. Said,
Yeah.
oh, you want solar farms in your community,
Yeah.
that's gonna leach
Well,
chemicals into
supposedly,
the ground.
the newer panels supposedly don't leach, the older ones do, they leach lead and mercury and everything else. So, but what happens is you have batteries that leak or anything else, we really need to make sure that we're not having the ground contaminated. So if we check with somebody, 'cause again, I'm not an expert on solar, but I would like to make them do random soil tests once a year, or at least every couple of years, to make sure that we're not having anything.
That's a good idea.
The one thing we did, it doesn't go to soil testing around the modules, but was to prohibit the use of PCB or halogen coolant oils.
Yeah.
I know from our work at DEP, there's still some PCB
Yeah,
oils used in
transformers
transformers.
and stuff. Super sites and
I
stuff.
think DEP is still replacing them, but theirs, but in other instances, they're still available on the market.
So we just want to make sure that we don't have the contamination down the road.
Include
That could go
soil.
under performance standards, maybe.
Yeah, it would have to, because it would be
Yes.
sort of an operational maintenance kind of requirement. Don't know. I just don't know enough about it. I don't even know what compounds to ask them to sample for.
Yeah, it would be unfair to just say start sampling. Would have to be saying
Right,
sampling for some specific things that
Well,
are
and-
concerned.
and then the question comes, what kind of sampling, are you gonna do
Right.
representative sample? I mean, are you,
Right.
Any of the ordinances you looked at from any other towns have anything that's requiring?
I haven't seen anything in the towns that I looked at that are in that table, but we didn't look at every town in the state. We primarily looked at the ones that are either lake communities or tourism communities.
Maybe Katie Fogg. Ask them if they had any.
Yeah, we can ask.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
So we want to,
Well, at least what you guys have kind of agreed on tonight, I can go back and take a look at it. It looks like most of what you really wanted for setbacks and stuff.
Setbacks and visual screenings, those are big
That
things.
was the big
Yeah.
complaints I was getting, and like I said, I'd rather go, let's not deal with a petition to make it 300-foot setback.
That would invite more trouble than people are even aware
It
of.
would, and I think that, and we've got some people in this town that really don't want these solar panels. If somebody put that addendum in there and we're going around at the same time with that right after, do you want to increase the solar ordinance setbacks by these amounts? It would not surprise me if it passed. So I think the compromises you guys have come up with tonight
This will work.
will work.
So Peter, I think we're, the one thing people give some thought to is how to describe a road, an access road that, doesn't basically look like a bowling alley.
Right.
That's not the right word.
Build it as if you were driving drunk.
I'm not sure those are the right words either, Rich.
Somewhere in between. That's probably.
And so I think where we're at in terms of the next meeting would be revisiting that vehicle access language on page 4 of my memo. And then we're on to, I believe, buffers along rivers, streams, and brooks. And the rest of what's contained in that in my memo, including buffers from high value plant and animal species identified by inland fish and wildlife, deer yards, wetlands, protection of prime farmland. Oh, and the discussion of how much clearance acceptable of woodland.
Yeah.
I didn't make a suggestion. I just raised it as an issue that we should. I also raised a question of should we require, like in the subdivision ordinance, that they set aside 15% of the developed land area as open space.
Yeah.
And then something dealing with vegetation management, the use of herbicides. And I had a suggestion for that upon completion of the facility that they have an inspection conducted for compliance by a Maine registered professional engineer that is submitted to you, Richard.
With open arms,
Huh?
with open arms.
Finally, that's
Those
the
are
thing
things.
where we're at.
Okay, so we're making good progress, I think. I know I am very aware, and I know you all are too, that the clock is ticking. This June, was it 12th? We have to make sure stuff is wrapped up. So our next meeting, we have an hour. Is that correct for commercial development review or
Correct.
discussion?
That's correct on 19.
Yep. So next Thursday, and then see how far we can get on that one.
So I'm gonna miss that meeting because I'll be down east fishing.
Okay, good for you. That'd be fun.
I'll be missing it too, because I'll be with George.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I know you didn't, but you do now.
See, news travels quickly. That's good.
So, you know, we just have to pick up. where we left off with.
Yeah.
I assume everybody's got this, so they,
Right, we'll pick up from there.
and if I come up with some magical language for the zigzag road, I'll email that to you, Peter.
Okay, thanks.
I wouldn't hold your breath.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, so thank you all for attending another longer meeting on a special night to do this. We're gonna keep on trudging along here and tackle it again next Thursday, and we'll make more progress. So
Yeah.
thank you. At this point, no other updates or anything. I would entertain a motion to wrap up this meeting. So Sarah,
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
second, any more discussion? All those in favor? Everybody's in favor. Yeah,
Yes.
we are adjourned. Thank you. Stop recording and leave the meeting. And I can help if you need to.